Chris McCarty. He is a great friend of Anderson County. We have him on speed dial, and it's funny. He's the only one that when he takes a vacation, everybody around here is worried. Okay, so but Chris does a great job. He really and truly knows education. He's a former educator. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate you guys having me. It's good to see everybody, and I'm going to join what he said. It is good to see everybody back. I will say, going into this year, it's going to be a better one, right? I mean, I think normally we can't get agreement on that, but golly, I hope we can get agreement this year. All right, so of course I'm going to start with just the easy, just kind of, non-emotional stuff, which is talk about child abuse reporting, right? I wish I try to make things lighthearted. I really do. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, it's impossible to do that with this presentation for good reason. I mean, it's a serious topic, so we'll jump into it. I'll take any questions you guys have. I will say, so that when I say the new child abuse reporting guidelines, they've basically been in effect now for over a year. You guys have been living with some of them. You might have some questions lingering about them. Some questions might have come up from last year kind of living with them of, well, what about when this happens? That's the kind of stuff I like to talk about. Okay, I mean, you guys know, you've heard me talk before, probably some of you like too many times, and I get it, right? But what I want to hear is ask me the questions, give me the scenarios. You know my only rule, if you heard me speak before, which is we don't use real names. You can say hypothetical even if you don't mean it, okay? It might be real. You say John Doe, say Jane Doe, all right? We are on camera, so I don't want to use kids' names. But, hey, we can talk about real issues. That's totally fine with me. Let's just not use real names. Deal? Okay, any questions to start on this, anything? All right, the other thing we're going to talk about this today, and we'll take breaks, and I'm going to go ahead and make a disclaimer. I hate even doing this. Normally, when I do a legislative update, and I do one most every year, the slides for the PowerPoint are like 9 to 10, or maybe 9 to 12, okay? This year it's 39. Don't shoot the messenger on that one. I cut out laws. I literally had to be like, okay, I'm almost at 40 slides. This law is not going to matter. I mean, that's literally what I had to do. I mean, I literally had to cut it down to 39. That's how busy the legislature was last year. So I will say this, an apolitical statement. If you talk to any of your local legislators, this would be my message to them. Can we just have a year off? Like, can we just have a year where y'all don't pass anything education related? Good or bad. Good or bad. Let's just give us a year because we're still trying to catch up from this one, okay? Because it is a lot of new stuff. I think there's two reasons for that. And again, I'll get into it later, but the big two reasons, whatever your politics are, pandemic is one. So a lot of the bills are pandemic related, and we're still kind of dealing with that. The second one is, and let's just be honest about it, we had a change in presidential administrations. So we have a lot of, and obviously our state legislature is a different party than that, so we had a lot of what I call political response bills to the federal government. And so we're going to be dealing with those as well. All right, so let's just go ahead and get into the child abuse reporting for Tennessee educators. All right, so this was passed last year, went into effect last year, signed by Governor Lee last year, and we're still sort of living with it. Let's just do this first. And I'm going to make this interactive. So if you don't, you guys know he's teach 8th grade, so I'll call on you. I don't care. So if you don't raise hands or don't just start talking, I'll just call on you. What was the old standard? Like if we have a report of abuse, what's the way we've always handled it really for more than 10 years?
Investigated it.
There you go. When you say investigated it, help me out there. You know I'm going to put you on the spot. Yeah, it's good. That's good.
Counselor,
Yep.
assistant principal, somebody was asking questions, trying to get to the bottom of it to see if it needed to go any further.
Agree with you. Can I keep playing?
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of questions? Give me some examples. Like, let's just imagine 2 years ago, how would you have done it? And you're not wrong. You're 100% right.
I mean, if it were me and,
Yep.
and he'd come to my office, I'd, hey, got a report of this. Tell me a little bit about what's going on.
Yep.
And really just, I mean, I wouldn't lead in, but I'd ask a very open-ended question to
Yep.
see what information we got. Then I'd ask who and who was involved, and but find out if it was a student and if it was an adult, and where they're at. And at some point, I'm gonna contact SRO. And
Yep. Okay.
Depending on if it's a female, I've probably got a female counselor in there with you.
Good idea. Yep. So all that's good. And in fact, what I'm going to say is even under the new law, 80% of what you just said is great. Okay, so that hasn't changed too much, right? We'll go through it. One of the big things, messages-wise, that I'll say is We got to put the brakes on sooner now. And you'll see what I mean by that. We got to put the brakes on sooner. And one thing you said that is really important, and again, we'll go through this as we do it, is we have to focus on open-ended. By law now. Like, that's always been a good practice, and I know a lot of you guys have done that because that's just what you do because you're good at your job. But by law now, we have to be open-ended with our inquiries to the kid. And we'll talk about what that means, right? But the other thing you mentioned, and everything you said was right, have you heard that a lot? Do people say, because my wife never says phrases like that to me. Everything you just said was right. I've never heard that in my life. So I just want to give, I want to give you a minute. Right. I just want to give you a minute to bask in the fact that I said everything you just said was right, because I don't hear that a lot either. Okay. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to give it to you.
You weren't right, I was doing a little tush push there.
Did you say 22 years, right? So statute of limitations good. You're good. You're golden. We don't have to. We can move on from that. You don't have to worry about it. Sorry, Cotton Eye Joe threw me off. I'm going a different place. Anyway, so moving forward, the other thing we got to say is the big message from this new statute is, I'm going to fall, who, right? Who do we have to report it to? So what is, you said it, in the old days, 2 years ago, it could just be your SRO, right? You literally could have complied with the statute by just informing the SRO and letting him or her run with it. That would have been fine. Now, under this new statute, that would not be good enough, right? That would not be good enough. It's a multi-phased, multi-party reporting requirement, okay? Every time, and we'll go through this, but the big message, if you learn nothing else from this presentation, hear me say this. Every time we have any suspected abuse, 3 parties have to be informed, period. Those 3 parties are DCS and law enforcement and your school child abuse coordinator. Every single time. Okay? In the old days, it was DCS or law enforcement. Now it is all 3 with the coordinator added. That's the biggest change by far. Okay? All right, we'll keep going.
Is that Greg deal?
Yo, let's talk about that. So your child abuse coordinator, I'm moving on. Your child abuse coordinator has to be school level. Every single school, and I'm not going to quiz you right now. If right now you're thinking, it's okay, don't tell me, don't raise your hands. If right now you're thinking, I don't know who that is, find out, okay, and make sure your school has a child abuse coordinator, and by law, we have to have an alternate child abuse coordinator in every school, okay? All right, so let's go through the basics, and we'll go through it in detail in a second. So we already talked about a lot of this, but how suspected abuse is reported is a change. Which agencies must receive reports is a change. Individual duties of school employees is a change. Training required, so now we're required to do this training annually. You guys don't have to have it for me annually. We could use this video. We could do a lot of different things. This PowerPoint, like I always say, is your guys. The moment I send it, you can have it. You can use it in your classrooms. You can use it with your teachers. You can modify it. I don't care. Okay, if you modify it, just don't put my name on it anymore because I no longer wrote it. Okay, other than that, use it all you want. And record keeping is a big part of this too. One thing that was sort of different in the old requirement is we were almost, in a lot of ways, motivated not to keep that many records because it was really supposed to immediately go to law enforcement or DCS, and we're just sort of like that, right? Now we have to keep school level records of all reports. And I don't mean district level, I mean school level records of all reports. So one other thing I'm going to say about this, and just a practical thing, and I hope you already have it, is there literally needs to be somewhere in your school a filing cabinet with a lock on it that is just for child abuse reporting records. They are supposed to be kept completely separate from all other records. So they can't be with the child's CUME file, they can't be with SPED file, nothing. By law, they have to be completely separate and with the child abuse coordinator. Okay? However you want to do that's fine, but I'm just saying keep them separate. Yes, sir?
Chris, am I correct in that it's also mandatory that they have to go over this with their staff as well? And can that be in the form of Safe Schools or recording?
Yeah.
Or is there something specific?
When you say go over it with their staff, the
Yeah,
admin,
train their staff.
absolutely. That's a great question. Not only is it's all school employees. And that's a great point. So it's not just your teachers, not just your TAs, it's your custodians, it's everybody. Okay, it's everybody that could be in contact, your cafeteria employees. So yeah, you do have to go through it in some way. I'll say this though, Do you have to do, I'm coming to you, just say, do you have to do this level of in-depth with all employees? No. I think you could do a 20-minute training on an admin day and probably accomplish the big parts of this. Kind of do the big, the big things, which are who do you report it to every time, who's the child abuse coordinator, that type of thing. But yeah, we do have to have annual training with all staff now. Great question. Yes?
How long do we keep those records on file?
They have not indicated that yet, but I would say candidly, as long as that student is in the school system at least, and my general rule with that, like was said, is even a few years after that, so 2 to 3 years.
When they go to a new school, would we send that?
No.
Or we just keep it on
We
file
would keep
there?
that with us. That's a great question. So if that child were to transfer to another school and we get the transfer records request, those do not go with the new school. Now, can I change that for just a second? If we were to get a subpoena or a court order, yes. But general transfer request, general records transfer, no. Those do not go. Yes, sir.
So you said it's
I'm coming to you.
for Cume folder. The parent, this student is no longer with me.
Sure.
That sort of thing, but the parent had brought that information in from the court. Is this just stuff that we report?
Great
in-house, or is
question.
it something, because that was in her.
No, that's a great question. Let's divide that, and I probably did a bad job of describing that. So let's divide those into two. Anything from outside. So if you get something from DCS that indicates that this child was formerly abused, that's kind of what you're getting at right there. That can go in the Cume file. That can go in some other file. That does not go in our file. This file is purely reports that have originated from a school system report only. And it's really the records of the child abuse coordinator. So anytime they're brought in a reporting situation, all of that has to be recorded and kept stored by that coordinator.
Would it matter if in-house and what's in that folder are tied together?
I don't have a problem with that, actually. I don't have a problem. There's nothing in the statute that says, for example, if you had like you're saying, if you had a report from DCS, which, by the way, I'm living in a world right now in my head where I'm thinking DCS is giving us information. So that's me winking at the camera. Okay, I said it. Okay, but if they did, if magic happens, and they gave you that, and your child abuse coordinator wants that, maybe because she or he wants the police to know, hey, this is not the first time, and that would be good to have it together. There's no problem. You could do that. You could do that. The only thing you have to keep in that file is the stuff that originates from us. Make sense? Yeah, that's a good question, though. Yep. Can you keep it electronically? Yes, I think you can keep it electronically. I would also recommend, though, that we keep a hard copy of it. I would also recommend we keep a hard copy of it. I don't think there's anything in the statute for sure that says you can't do it electronically, because it just basically says you have to keep it confidential, which means encryption would work. So I'm fine with the password protection, but I'm also recommending that you have that separate file.
So they don't need to, it doesn't need to be linked to the student, our student data system like for Skyward.
No.
If you put notes in Skyward, they can't leave it in that. It needs
Right.
to be separate.
It needs to totally be separate from our normal school records. Yeah, and that's where I was sort of going with that. And that's a great question. I mean, the reason for that is we don't want the state, and the statute's really clear, I think for good reasons, that we don't want mistakes to be made that these records are just accidentally shared with too many people. I mean, these should be the most confidential of confidential, right? Yes, sir.
So is it mandated that the teacher or principal report to DCS before they leave school that day? Because I know a couple of people that got suspended in Knox County because they went home and then they came back the next day and made.
Yeah, you're supposed to do it as soon as possible. So, and I know of other situations where somebody almost, I won't name the situation, but it also comes out of Knox County, where there was a 48-hour window, and those people almost got prosecuted. Not just suspended, they were almost prosecuted for failure to report. And they literally did it within 48 hours. So what I tell people is you got to do this as soon as humanly possible. Now, does that mean, and that's the beauty of the hotline. I mean, I will say that, right? The hotline, you could do it any time. You could do it after hours. I don't give DCS a lot of compliments, but I will say the hotline is positive for that reason. If you hypothetically, I'd like you to go ahead and do both law enforcement and DCS, but if you went ahead and at least told DCS, and then maybe your SRO was not going to be back until the next morning, I'm fine with that. But at least one of the two reports, I think, get done as soon as humanly possible. Is that fair?
Then we could come back in and start doing our own
Absolutely. Yeah.
questioning and those type of things.
Absolutely.
Once we've let those two folks
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the reporting needs to go to one of those two agencies, preferably both, but one of those two as soon as possible, and that's to protect you guys. I mean, and you guys and the teacher. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned transfer. What about following as a kid goes from elementary to middle and high? Where does that go?
No, it really needs to say just at that school. Really needs to say just at that school. So the statute is really clear that every school's child abuse coordinator will have a file and will have a system. And so it's really just at that school. That's a good question as well. Yep.
So a lot of times with SROs, you will report verbally to them.
Sure.
Do you recommend another method for that?
No, verbally's fine. Verbally's fine. As long as you're reporting it. Now, what I'm going to say is the beautiful part of this new system is let's play this out. You immediately tell the child abuse coordinator, you get them involved. The child abuse coordinator tells they're going to be with you when the SRO and DCS is told, right? And then the child abuse coordinator is going to document all that in writing. So no matter what you do with the reporting, the beauty of this requirement is the child abuse coordinator has to put everything down in a memo, in handwritten notes, whatever they want to do, but that's what is actually stored. Does that make sense? Yep.
Okay, so that's making the report.
Yep. I'm not even going to need these slides, by the way. Y'all's questions are hitting all of them. That's a good thing. I like that. So go ahead.
So if a kid discloses something to a teacher,
Yep.
the teacher then tells the child abuse coordinator. If both of them have knowledge that both of them still need to make a report.
Okay, that's a great question. Can I repeat that out loud? So the question was basically child reports to teacher, which is typically what happens. Teacher's immediately going to go to the child abuse coordinator. That's right. Then the question becomes who actually has the duty to report? Both. It's both. So the statute is clear in that the coordinator needs to be present, but the teacher does not absolve themselves by handing it off to the coordinator. Now, you could have them, either one of them could do the talking. I don't care who does the talking, but both need to be present.
So not two separate reports.
No, not two separate reports.
That's what I've heard.
I apologize. I apologize.
The teacher's calling one
No.
room and I'm calling in my office.
My fault, no. But they both need to be present. So for example, the way this is normally going to play out, let's say you're making the DCS report, you're the child abuse coordinator, the teacher's there, just sit them down and hit speakerphone, and just both of you be there for that one phone call. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. But one thing that's clear in the statute is the person that gets the initial information does not get to have a relay baton, hand it to the coordinator and go like that. Okay, they have to be involved up to the reporting. Yep.
What if the reporting's not done by phone calls, then the email and get that confirmation?
Yeah. So either way, I would just make sure.
I've got to do the one as well as the teacher?
No, just one needs to be made. But then that's a great question. But have the child abuse coordinator, when they write that up, say, email was sent and so were both present to make sure that it was sent. Something like that. It could be literally something that easy. Yes.
I heard a moment ago, keep records for a couple of years post-graduation.
Yep.
So K-5 school, do they hold those records for every student 2 years past graduation, or are they holding them 2 years past the 5th grade?
I would hold those records as long as that kid's in your school system. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Okay.
If you have a case where the teacher goes to the coordinator and they've already made the referral, they already did a DCS referral, and then they're just letting them know, what if they?
That's okay. I mean, we're not going to punish teachers for that. Just use that as an educational moment for the coordinator. And just make sure that the coordinator says, hey, next time, before you make the report, actually make sure I'm involved in it. Just make sure that I'm present when you make the report. That's all I would say.
Make sure it logs the number, the number
Yeah.
of the case number they
Yeah,
give you
and
and all that.
exactly. And you guys know where we're going with that is, anytime somebody's calling that hotline, the first thing, and I think all of us know this because you've done it before, the first thing you're going to say is, what's my intake number? Right? I mean, first thing on that phone call, I want to know from the DCS person on the hotline, what is my intake number? Because that's what protects you later. Right? So yeah, make sure the teacher has that. That's a great point.
So is that the documentation then?
Yep.
Like if I do an online report?
Yep.
That what I print out?
That would work.
That would be the documentation. I wouldn't have to write anything else
Nope,
down?
you wouldn't. So
Because
let's.
It's all in the system.
That's a great question. So let's play that out. Let's say you do the email report, you print it out. In terms of the child abuse coordinator documenting that the DCS referral happened, that's all you need. You would literally just have that print out and it would go in your file. Now, if it was a phone call, then somebody needs to literally write up what the intake number is and when the phone call was made.
Okay.
Make
'Cause
sense?
on that paper, it doesn't have their name, like it puts their initials and that's it.
That's okay. We would know.
We would know, okay.
Yeah, and every one of those kids in that filing system is going to have a number and initials, and we know who they are.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're good on that. Yes, sir.
So play this out for me, Chris?
Sure.
So Travis is talking about asking questions in a situation like that. We've been told by law enforcement before that we can't really ask many questions.
You can't.
Because that'll sully the forensic interview.
And that's what this, and I want to get into that. So I've got some examples of that. But absolutely, this statute is very clear. I mean, let's just be blunt. The reason this statute was passed was to deal with that. Because what was happening, and you guys know this because you've heard it from law enforcement, but I've heard it from law enforcement all over, and I've had some people get in real trouble for it. It's asking too many questions, because then what happens is, if you guys know this as it plays out, okay, and let's give you an example, okay? So say I'm doing the interview of the kid, and I'm a teacher, and I'm just trying to, I know they have a bad home situation. So without even thinking, I'll say, did your daddy hurt you? Okay? Because I know the dad's a jerk, okay? And it's not malicious what I've just done, but that's imprinting. That's imprinting, right? And so now as an interviewer and as the defense attorney later, which I would never do criminal defense on that, but as that defense attorney, I'm going to say, well, it was like a bad lineup, right? Because the first time they ever heard any information or they were questioned about it, they were imprinted with an adult said dad. This adult wants me to say it was my dad. That's literally the way a child psych will say it happens, is that, you want me to say it was my dad, so I will. Now, it might have been the dad, but now the whole thing's tainted and there's probably no conviction. Over that one question being asked first, the whole case became monumentally harder to prosecute. And that's what we're trying to prevent. I mean, I will say this is a good statute for that reason, because really what it gets down to is we want to put the bad dudes in jail, right? And the more we can do to help teachers understand that, again, I don't believe there was a single teacher that's asked a question like that for a bad reason. But it's a mistake that hurts the criminal prosecution process later in a big, big, big way. Okay? Let's keep going. These are great questions, though. Yes, sir. Who got one? Yep.
Okay, when nurses see these students,
Sure.
you make a document in Skyward as an office visit. Is that okay to continue doing, although we're...
That's a great question. I probably would not do that anymore. I would let the child abuse coordinator document that apart from that. Now, let me ask you this, though. I have a follow-up question to that, because I can change my mind. Do you feel like from a ethical obligation as a nurse that you need to do that?
Well, I mean, we always are all about charting.
Yeah. Okay, well, if you feel like, let me say this. If you feel like that's a requirement from a board of professional, like nurses board requirement, then do it. I'm never going to tell you not to do that. Okay? But that might be a question that we need to follow up with the board on. Does that make sense?
Did she write in there that after the kid reported that she contacted the child abuse
Sure.
coordinator and just leave it at that?
Yeah, and that's going to be your decision on how you do that. But I'm just saying, I think this statute is clear that we're not supposed to create a lot of records on this. And it is clear about sort of where those records go. But I also understand where you're coming from, where I think you're coming from, which is very valid, that you have ethical obligations because of your profession to do certain things. So that's a good question, actually. We might need to follow up on that. Is that okay?
It is protected. Like, there's only
Oh, it's
certain
definitely
things that get
protected.
into the medical
Yeah.
area.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the protection side. It's more the creating multiple records on it under this statute. But let's just pass that one. We might follow up on it. Is that okay? Yep.
Chris, would you recommend, either at the school level or the district level, creating a form for our coordinator to fill out so that they're asking the right information and getting the right information, so then they have that record without just random notes, or not?
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing. Anytime we can get the idea of more consistency, anytime we can get the idea of everybody's doing it the same way, school to school, and also making sure that we have the right records every time, sure. I mean, that's not a bad thing.
Do you know of something out there that could guide us, or hey, Chris, you got one?
No one's asked me to create one yet, but sure, I'll create one. But no, that's a fair question. I wasn't being flippant. I don't know if anybody's created one yet. If I had to bet, I bet Knox has. And I wouldn't mind following up for you guys on that and finding out. I'll bet you, I would be surprised if they hadn't.
I just think a form would help ask the right and not the wrong
Yeah,
questions.
I do too.
Gives you that documentation piece that you need.
I think a form's a great idea.
When we make the report, would it be better for us to list anonymous or put our actual name and information?
So,
What's she saying is DCS didn't leave it
DCS
on?
tells us.
oh, I know that. No, I know where you're going with that. So here's probably that's a great question, and here's where I'm going with that. The one thing about this new reporting statute that I think we're going to have to express, I'm answering this in a long-winded way, to our educators is there was, at least conceptually, although I agree with you guys that it wasn't always kept anonymous, conceptually there was a method under the old system, even as a teacher or a TA, to report child abuse anonymously and to keep it anonymous. I don't think that exists anymore for educationally related report. And here's why, okay? Because now every single time we do it, we can't just make a DCS report. We also have to make a law enforcement report, and they don't have a methodology to keep the names out of it. You're going to be an affiant. You're going to be listed as a witness. So what I would say is it's not even worth the time to do it anonymous anymore. I think it's better just to use a name. Yeah.
So if you have a teacher that wants to remain anonymous,
They cannot.
can they use the principal as a scapegoat?
If
you've got a female teacher in your report,
I know what you're getting at.
she's afraid of that man.
I know what you're getting at. I mean, I can answer that the technical way, okay? The technical way is, let me repeat the question. So the technical way is, can an individual absolve him or herself of the individual duty under this statute to make the report? Not technically, but let me keep going. I'm almost there. Right, I was going to say. If you ask me, though, is the most important thing of this statute that a report is made to the proper officials and it is made quickly, that is the most important part. So you get where I'm going. So if that report is made quickly, is it my opinion that anybody's ever going to get in trouble later? No. See where I'm going? Okay, but under the statute, I can't tell you that you could ever absolve somebody of their individual duty. But I think you understand in a coded way what I'm saying. Not very coded, by the way. That was the worst encryption ever. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the statute. And we've covered a lot of this, so because we've covered it with questions, I'll go through it quicker, okay? If a school teacher, school official, or other school personnel has knowledge or reasonable cause to suspect the child who attends the school may be a victim of child abuse or child sexual abuse sufficient to require reporting. Okay, another thing I want to mention, though, and there is a reason I put that up there, is it is reasonable cause, right? So one thing that I always like to remind our teachers of, and everybody in this room is, even if you're wrong, ultimately, and we could be, okay? You might see a handprint on a kid's arm, and yes, 99% of the time that's because abuse has occurred, but there could be another reason. I don't know. Maybe he was going to fall off a bridge and his dad caught him by the arm. I mean, I literally don't know. I mean, there's possible. But if you report it because you have reasonable cause to believe this kid could be in harm, you are protected. Okay? There's literally another part of this statute that specifically says anybody that makes a reasonable good faith report, even if they're wrong, cannot be sued for it. You have complete immunity. Okay, so mom and dad can't come back and sue you, can't put you in court. One, insurance will cover that, and then immediately we'll file for a motion to dismiss to get you out of it. Okay, and it's a done deal. That statute is tight. Okay, the only time you can get in trouble for making a child abuse report is if you make what I call a malicious report. Okay, and really, I've never seen one of those come up in a school situation. Those come up in divorces a lot, to be candid. And really, you guys know what I'm probably talking about. It's a situation where one spouse or the other makes an abuse report to get advantage in a custody situation. If that is proven, yeah, absolutely, they'll prosecute you for that. Okay, because you've done it maliciously, intentionally. You knew it was wrong. You did it to get advantage. We're not running into that here. So I always like to tell teachers, do not worry about getting sued. Even if you're dead wrong, even if you got it wrong and the facts are the kid really did fall down the stairs. Okay, I would rather us report it and be wrong than worry about getting sued, because you're just not going to get sued. Okay, makes sense? Okay. All right, if the child voluntarily discloses information, this is actually in the statute as well, about possible abuse to a school teacher, school official, or any school personnel. So that's the part we have to talk about too. That's what you're getting at with training. I mean, technically this applies if a kid happens to have their favorite cafeteria worker and pulls him or her aside. They need to know who to go and talk to. Okay, it's clear as day that that's what this works to do. Then the child must be provided a quiet and private place, that's in the statute requirement now, to speak, and the person receiving the information must listen openly and speak at the child's level in a positive, non-judgmental tone. So another thing I'm going to say is, and I bet a lot of you have already done this, make sure that your child abuse coordinator literally has a designated space that he or she at any time can go to and utilize for these interviews. And every teacher in your building needs to know, where is that space? Okay, that is a big part of this. Because one thing that we could get in trouble for later is if the teacher does the classic, and this could absolutely happen, and again, I'm not judging, the teacher just pulls the kid to the back of the room, and there's 25 kids within 6 feet of it, and starts having that conversation. We cannot do that anymore. And it really shouldn't be done in a hallway anymore either, just pulling them outside in the hallway. So we got to give teachers backup and help them in terms of, and we got to give them coverage too, right? Because I just explained to you guys, we can't just, the teacher could have a busy day, they could have a lot of kids, but he or she has to go with the coordinator for this all to happen. So we're going to have to give them coverage in their room to let that happen, right? And I know I just said to you, hey, find me another adult to watch a class. I know that it's not as easy as I made it sound. I'm not stupid, but I'm just saying we got to do it, okay? All right. The person receiving the information from the child must allow the child to say what's happened in his or her own words, avoid conducting an investigation by asking the child detailed questions, make every effort to write down the child's exact words. So another thing I would say is when you've got the child abuse coordinator, typically the way I'm recommending people do this is have the child abuse coordinator do the questions, because they're going to be the one that's used to doing it, and the more they do it, the better at it they're going to get. And they're also going to get better at knowing when to stop, whereas the teacher's not. So what I would say to our teachers is, yes, you have to be there for that, but you're going to be the note taker. You're going to be the note taker. Let the coordinator, well, I'd say most teachers can be good note takers. You guys make judgment on that. I know some can't. You don't want to read my handwriting later, okay? But you see where I'm going with that. Like, I know some teachers don't want to be pulled out of this process, but we really, in a lot of ways, need them to be, because they're not used to doing these questions, whereas your coordinators are going to get, I hate to say it, they're going to get good at it, because they're going to do it multiple times a year. That's another reason, if we really dig into the statute, that they want the coordinators, because when you have this sort of funnel system in the school, right, then we get better at it. We get better at it, and we get more consistent.
Do you,
Yep.
or does our district, do we have like a list of possible open-ended questions just as examples for teachers to see or for the coordinators to see?
You don't, but I will tell you this. I literally would just use, instead of telling you exactly what the questions are, I just use the old faithful who, what, when, where, how. Okay, if it's who, what, when, where, how, you're there. That's it. I mean, that is right there really all you need to know. Who hurt you? How did it happen? Where did it happen? Honestly, I could be done at that point. That's it. I mean, I just don't need any more than that. And those are all, I will tell you by a
Then
quarter.
we're getting back into what Dan was talking about from last year with Title IX. We're getting into where we're conducting this massive investigation
Yep.
that needs to be conducted by law enforcement and somebody
Exactly.
above us.
Yep. Yeah. Honestly, if you ask kids that, who hurt you? How did it happen? Where did it happen? Or you could also follow up with when did it happen? All those are fine. If you stop there, you are literally, that's all you have to do, and you're gold under the statute. And I will tell you this, we've got hundreds of years of courtroom history about what is a leading question, because lawyers object to it all the time. And the one thing that is that judges, law professors, everybody will tell you is who, what, when, where, how is always going to be open-ended. Always. All right, make every effort to write down. Refrain from making any statements to the child about the alleged abuse. So again, everything does need to be in the form of a question. Now, you can say things like a comforting phrase. Obviously, we're not telling you not to be humans. Okay, you can say, hey, are you okay? Hey, do you need a tissue? I mean, obviously, the way you comfort a child, you guys don't need a seminar on that. Immediately notify the child abuse coordinator, and then report the information to the department or to law enforcement. So the coordinator needs to be involved. These are just kind of examples I was telling you. You know, how did you get to work? Obviously, these are not abuse-related questions, but I'm just showing you these are examples of the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question. Basically, always remind yourself of this too, is if the question can be answered with one word, then really that's not typically an open-ended question. If it ends in a yes, no, or a true, false, that is for sure a leading question, right? Right? Did you get to school here today driving a car? Right, so again, that doesn't seem like a leading question, but that is clearly a leading question. By the way, it could have been a scooter, I don't know. All right, new requirements. School teachers, school officials, and other school personnel should be observant of any bruising, injury, or markings or other unusual behavior that may be the result of the child abuse. However, this is in there too. This is different. Photographs of any bruising, injury, etc. must not be taken by any school child abuse coordinator, teacher, or any school personnel. We cannot do that under this law. I don't know why. I think it's a chain of evidence requirement. So what I would say there is, if you're the child abuse coordinator, if you're the principal, really in a nice way remind your SRO, hey, we've got bruising. That SRO absolutely can take that picture. Okay, but somebody needs to. I'm just telling you that we can't do it with our phones and our cameras anymore. Make sense? But there's nothing wrong with gently reminding your SRO to do it because somebody needs to do it. I mean, I use the example again, and you guys have all seen those bruises. I mean, when you got the 5-finger bruise, somebody needs to take a picture of that because those go away fairly quickly a lot of times. All right, so somebody needs to do that. We just can't do it.
Is that information that the law enforcement keeps? I don't need to keep
You
that.
do not need to keep that at all. In fact, we cannot keep that. So, for example, if we had in our child abuse coordinator record cabinet a picture of the bruising, we actually would be in violation of the statute because we absolutely cannot take that with our own devices. Great question. Okay. All right, so I've already talked about this. The big change, and by far, again, the biggest difference is under the old statute, it was DCS or law enforcement. Now it is coordinator, DCS, and law enforcement. Okay? So this is the order that I recommend, and you don't have to do it this way, okay? I do think the way the statute is written, I don't know how you would not get the coordinator involved first. And the other thing to report there is make sure every school has to have an alternate child abuse coordinator as well. Because let's just be honest, sometimes you're going to have coordinators out with a knee surgery, maternity leave, whatever. All your school personnel need to know who's the other person, who's the other alternate there, okay? And then the reason I say police next is because usually your SRO's in the building, right? That's just me being practical and saying, hey, if the person in the building, the earlier you can involve them, the better. That's why I say that. And then if everybody wants to do the DCS referral, that's the typical way it'll happen. Again, you don't have to do this. As long as you hit all three, you're still good. Okay, this is what we talked about before. All information regarding such suspected abuse must be maintained by the school child abuse coordinator in a confidential file separate from the child's educational file. And again, I got to say this. Let's go back to SPED for a second. Who's responsible? If I'm a CDC teacher, who's responsible for making sure where the IEPs are and how they're stored and if they're confidential? Who's responsible for that? The teacher, the CDC teacher. The coordinator needs to understand he or she is responsible for these files. Absolutely responsible for these files. So hypothetically, if we had a situation later where we get a lawsuit in 10 years and somebody says we don't do, hopefully this will never happen. I think that's wood. And we get accused of not handling child abuse right, the way that will work is that coordinator is there's going to be questions to that coordinator about how you do this, how you do that, where do you keep the files. And if he or she is not keeping those files, that absolutely would be neglected duty. So this is part of their job. No doubt about it. I can't stress that enough. They're in charge of those files. It doesn't say the principal keeps it. It doesn't say the teacher keeps it. It says the coordinator keeps it. All right. We already talked about that. You have to have an abuse coordinator in every school and an alternate abuse coordinator in every single school.
Chris,
Yes, sir.
If the coordinator changed from year to year, the files wouldn't stay with that coordinator. They would stay wherever they're at.
Correct.
Place.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So let me repeat that. The file cabinet is the schools. It's not the coordinators. So if the coordinator changes, that new coordinator now is in charge of any files that he or she creates and the old ones that the school has to keep on file. Okay, so they're basically, it's like whoever holds the keys to Fort Knox. The new person with the keys still protects the same gold, right? All right, we talked about this. Our child abuse coordinators and our alternative coordinators are supposed to get more in-depth training. So they would have to go. I would argue that if they did something like this, that would be the level of depth they're supposed to have. If you have any local programs, one thing that's happened is a lot of DA's offices are offering more programming on this. So if you want to talk to your local DA's office, your sheriff's department, and say, hey, do you want to do anything with our child abuse coordinators? A lot of them are saying, absolutely, we'd love to. I just cooperated in one of those with Claiborne County. I cooperated in one of those with Bristol. And both DA's offices initiated both. And I love getting our coordinators talking to law enforcement because, let's be blunt, they're the ones that are going to be the face of this moving forward and the ones typically dealing with law enforcement. So the more they get to know the DAs, the better. I think the better relationship we're all going to have, and the main thing is the better prosecutions we're going to have, okay, which is the main goal, right? Be available to school personnel, assist school personnel. This is for their coordinators. Serve as a liaison between the school, the department, and law enforcement. I mean, so part of the child abuse coordinator's job, like I was just saying, is to be a good intermediary and have good relationships with law enforcement. So hypothetically, although I don't think this is going to happen, but I do have to say it, if you start to have a child abuse coordinator that you realize does not have a good relationship with your SRO, we need a new child abuse coordinator. Or we need a new SRO for the school. Because those two people specifically have to work well together. They have to for this to work. Yes, sir.
This is a crazy question, but
Oh, you said it, so I'm expecting. I'm just kidding. You know I love you. No, Darren, I love you. Go ahead.
Like, if you stack everything up and just be practical about it, it probably makes sense to make a child abuse coordinator be a related arts teacher. Because if you're in a school where you've got a lot of abuse, I mean, I could be pulling my English teacher every day, twice a week.
I think
And
most
I need her in there teaching class because Snyder's going to be banging on me about how many times I'm pulling my certified English teacher to go talk about child abuse.
No, I get that. I will say this, and I can't tell you guys decide that. Most school systems that I've talked to are going to use guidance counselors.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
Almost everybody that I've talked to is utilizing a guidance counselor as their primary abuse coordinator. Almost everybody that I've talked to. Now, there's other ways.
I think that's what it probably needs to be, the counselor and administrator.
So yeah, so
Hey, in Anderson County High School, I know it's gonna be James.
Getting all the duties today.
I will. Again, just going off what Tim said, if you said to me, because I've done this training a lot now, and I've talked to a lot of systems, most systems, and there's exceptions to this, so I'm not saying this is the rule. Most systems, what I've heard is primary abuse coordinator, guidance counselor, alternate is assistant principal. Because, and the main reason for that is if you use the alternate assistant principal, they're usually going to be at the school. So you have more of an idea that they're not going to be, as you guys know, you're always at the school. So that's the reason. Yep.
Okay. I see that you have child abuse and sexual abuse.
Yes.
What if it's in neglect?
That's a great question. So they don't really talk about neglect as much in this new statute, but I think we handle it the same way. And the reason for that is I think there's an argument, because the statute's not written well in that regard, in my opinion, there's an argument that you could do neglect the old way, but I think what that's going to do is cause mass confusion. So there's nothing that, we can definitely report neglect the same way under this new statute, so I think that's what we do. Does that make sense? Because if we do it the other way, you know where I'm going, you don't want there to be two channels because it's going to lead to massive mistakes. So let's just all report any type of abuse, neglect the same way. Make sense? Any other questions? That's a great question, though. Okay. All right. Any questions? You guys have asked a bunch, which is great. That's what I want. Any questions on that? Because you asked questions, I went through it pretty quickly. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is let's take 5 minutes and get a break and restrooms, etc. But let's come back right after that. Thank y'all. You okay? Thank you. No. I promise I don't have COVID. I feel like every time you cough now, you have to apologize to people. Oh.
We know you've had your shot.
Oh, I did. You guys gave it to me, and I also had COVID in January, so I'm really ramped up. I still can't smell. Yeah, 7 months now. Yeah. It's starting to sort of come back. Like, it's the weirdest thing. I got a buddy that's an ENT, so he's telling me it's normal that this happens, but they're learning. But like one day I'll just randomly be able to smell something for a minute, and then it goes away again.
So I told Tim, just call Austin. One of his guys positive.
Oh.
Hadn't been vaccinated. I don't know if it's in the school system or protocol now, contact tracing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know how many guys are using their shot. They're not doing anything.
So I'll tell you this, you're probably going to be shocked by this, but a lot of systems now, in fact everyone I know of, is not going to do the contact tracing.
He said a lot of guys will vaccinated.
So the message this year that I'm hearing everybody say is it's the health department's job. We're not doing it this year. We'll cooperate with you, but we're not doing the contact tracing and we're not doing the orders.
Well, he's really concerned.
Oh no, I would. I'd be too. Sure. I know. I get it. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that is all I'm hearing. And you know, there's a new, well, you can totally get me going now. There's a new bill that basically says you have the right to work at all times. So there's an argument under that bill. You can't, yeah, you can't really. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, I do. Yeah. In which way? Like on this, same thing.
Yeah.
So they
To the principal at the school they're going to?
No, they need to report it to, well, yeah, because they're not going to know who the coordinators are. So yes, I would tell the principal, and then that driver, technically, we need to bring them in at some point to make the DCS report.
Bring them into the school?
Yep, yep, at some point that day.
Okay.
Now, with the bus driver, I understand that the SRO is going to be notified, but at some point what I would say is that bus driver, to protect him or herself, needs to come in and sit down and they'll do that conference call with DCS together.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, this same thing would apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know they consider it an employee as well.
They are.
But they're not in the school.
No, they're still employee though. There's no question. So what I would say is have that bus driver just contact the principal. The principal can run with it with the coordinator, but maybe some point that day bring the driver in to do the DCS report.
Okay.
Fair?
Same thing as bad drivers too. As well.
Yep, same thing. Okay. Yes, sir. That's a good question. You're looking good, by the way. You lost weight?
I gained it back.
Man, I gained it back too. Pandemic destroyed me, man. Pandemic destroyed me. Gosh.
Deal was bad.
No comment. No comment. Well, it looked like y'all had fun though.
We did. We had a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
I gained 8 pounds.
Oh, no, I'm joking with you. No joke, I was on vacation, last week as well, and I gained 7, maybe 8, yeah. It all, and I had been dieting before I went, and it all came back. That's what stinks, man. Oh yeah. So what I do is I fast. I won't eat 2 days a week. Yeah, I'll eat breakfast in the morning, then I won't eat for 24 hours.
Yeah, but that hurts you.
I love it. I love it. It's been no, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but for me, it's got my levels down. It helps me a lot, and then I feel a little cleaner when I do it. It's weird. It's hard to explain it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I've taken that too. I've taken that too.
I know Kim sitting there saying y'all are crazy.
She's ignoring us completely.
Kim very smart. She
Oh.
knows. She's
Oh, absolutely.
Be quiet and just listen.
Oh yeah, I know that.
Hey, that's the way I do.
Oh, I was going to do. I need them to pop that legislative update up. I just remembered that. Let's see. How are you?
Good to see you.
Doing good, man.
How are you?
You have a good summer?
Yes, sir. Really
Same,
good.
same.
Really good.
Too daggum short. Now, when do you all officially start back?
We'll be back. Principals are this week, next week, and then teachers
Kids,
come.
kids the 9th?
Say April 9th.
Okay, August 9th, yeah. Yeah, believe me, I say that kind of stuff all the time. Oh. How's football looking this year?
We got another great team.
Yeah? Y'all looking good?
Yeah, we got a full schedule, so it'll be fun.
What do you mean by that?
Got
Oh,
front-loaded games. We
Oh.
got Powell right off the bat, which is
Powell's good again. They're good again, I know.
Yes, on the very last play of the game
Oh.
last year. Threw one of them, I sent him for the game winner.
Oh, did they really?
Yeah.
Oh.
He's just like me. He's 5'6". He's not going to go to
But still.
receiver.
That's brutal. And I've heard that. Like, Cal's got a bunch of receivers, right? That's sort of where they're loaded. Yeah.
They got 3 with SEC offers. So.
Wow.
They got a great team. We'll play them. We'll play Fulton. We'll play 6A Science Hill.
How's Fulton now? I've heard they're up and down now.
They are. They lost. Well, that's how Cal got good.
Okay.
One of their Little League coaches that's been with him for 20 years.
Yeah.
Flip. He's a guru. Yeah. He's good.
Oh yeah, the baby Falcons.
He lives in Lonsdale.
Okay. Yep. That's how it works.
They
Yep.
were hired as a high school coach.
Was that a business pleasure or was it true?
Yep.
Middle school.
Yep.
House said, hey, you come in high school.
I wondered about that.
He went and he took all the mice with him.
Funny how that works.
It is. It works just like that.
Yeah. Oh, it always works like
I've
that.
never cried about anybody getting players because we get them crazy too.
Oh, yeah.
People turn us in all the time trying to get us in.
You guys hypothetically used to be called Tri-County High School. You remember that?
75 all
Yeah.
stars.
Oh yeah. I had a buddy that went to Campbell County High, and he said, "Yeah, about half my teammates that were at Jacksboro were playing for Anderson County at one point." Well, because that Jacksboro middle team, you remember the days? They were always good.
They're always good. They're tough.
Yeah. And I wouldn't want to play at Campbell County either.
They come down here. It's what it is.
Oh yeah. No, I remember. Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. No, one of my best friends is the DC at Alcoa, and so those guys get Nick. You know Nick, and he's about to take over. They say after this year, Gary's finally going to
They say
retire.
that in the last 2 years.
Apparently it's
I hope
done.
They worked the deal where he
Oh,
gets to do it.
I think it's done
Everybody wants him to
because
get a shot.
Brian almost took the Catholic job. So I think the Ray, I am too, but I think the reason he didn't is, I think finally Gary said, look, I'm going to do it this year. But no, you're right. He's been telling me for 10 years Gary's done this year. Yeah, I know.
We always laugh. Every time we go over and go with him,
Oh, yeah.
we always give him a hard time.
Oh yeah, well he's one of the best guys in the world. I love him, man. He's
Such
just,
a loud mouth, such a huge voice.
and the kids love him. Kids love him.
Great. I love what he does. He's like me. I give instruction.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you instruction the entire time.
Oh, yeah.
When you come off, you're going to know what
Oh, yeah.
you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And if you did it great, if you didn't do it, you're going to know what happened or what
Yeah.
you're going to do next time.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Those kids love him, you know. But you're right. Like, he doesn't stop talking. He does not, even when you're at dinner, he doesn't stop talking. Hey. Yeah, good talking.
No, I should.
Sure.
So this is my UT class. Joe Sharon is giving me some.
Uh-oh.
Bill 580, so I'm expecting that's going to happen so I can just take notes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk. That's no problem.
Get my paper.
Yeah, sure. How's dealing with Joe as a teacher?
It's resources now.
You can be blunt. Gotcha. He does. He does. He does. I like him. He's a good guy. But yes. And he always volunteers to do CLEs and stuff and he's always doing them, and they always go long. Like I've never, because we have to get our CLE credits, and I'll go, oh, Joe's doing one, I'll just pop on. So I was like, daggum, this is an hour 20, it's supposed to be an hour. Yeah.
It's like,
You're right.
there's no discussion, and I'm like, that's
Yeah.
give me something to do.
Right. No, I understand. He does. Yeah.
We've only had a couple of things.
Okay. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, he's a good guy, but he's a character. Yeah, I'll put it that way. All right, guys, we'll get back started. I've got to see your handwriting here. That's really good handwriting.
That's a left-handed handwriting.
That's really good too.
Like,
I could read all of that. I'm impressed. My handwriting does not look like that. No. More like somebody's having a seizure in the middle of writing. Yeah, it's very like they always say, handwriting experts. Like mine literally goes different sides at times. There's a lot to it. I was meant it. Yep. I was going to throw it to you. Oh, doing a drawing? Okay. No. Oh, you want me to draw them? Okay. How many am I picking out? Just one? Okay. Let me read it.
Yep.
Amanda Powers, $25. All right, thank you. Everybody can go.
All right, guys. Okay, before I do the legislative update, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into two things real quick without the PowerPoint. One is we had some questions at the break, wanted me to kind of remind on religion, right? So give me, if you don't mind, throw those questions back at me so they can hear.
So, for example, remind us again about the Bible release time.
Mm-hmm.
Remind us again about like church involvement in the school, like if they do a breakfast for you, are you allowed to post it on your Facebook page? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with the Bible release time. So that's a state law, and I think you guys have signed up for that. A lot of systems are doing the Bible release time now. And basically, as long as they're providing the transport or they're coordinating the transport with us and reimbursing us, and they can certainly do that under state law. They have to come back, but it is absolutely, we have to let them do it as long as we're allowing it during the day. And the biggest thing is just the transport. And if there are issues with them getting back on time, that is stuff that obviously you just want to have a friendly conversation about. But certainly they have the right to do that during the day. So that state law, it's been approved not just by state law, but there's been federal courts that have upheld that. That as long as it's not coordinated by us and they're giving us the money back on travel or they're handling the travel, then it's good.
So if a church comes to you and wants to do it, you can't really tell them no, or?
So how are you guys what do you guys handle typically the process of it?
The process is right now is they make application and then we talk about it.
There you go. But I mean, the answer is if they do, in that process, we really can't say no because you're a church. We would have to say, we'd have to make sure, and I bet this is what you guys are doing, you're going to do it in a time that works for us. You're going to do it in a time that's not taking kids out of math every day, etc. Right? So we can push back on that stuff, right?
Is there a time limit on that, a month or a week? Or?
It says, well, we only do it one time. Our board policy, our procedures is you're only allowed to do it one time a week.
Right.
For an hour. The state law says.
We can do a month.
You can do it a day.
We can do a month.
Once a month. The law is you can do it an hour a week.
Correct.
Well,
Yeah.
we do it only once.
And we haven't had, I haven't seen many people push back on that. A lot of the churches don't really have the resources to do it once a week and to run the buses and all that. So nobody's really pushing back on that.
Here's the one thing that we got in trouble on that is we were just trying to be safe, so we were sending one of our people with them just to make sure if somebody got out of control, and that we got in trouble for.
Yeah.
So we are not allowed to send any employee with those kids.
Yeah, the way I would look at it, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Are we liable, like if they have medical conditions, are we liable sending them and not having them?
No, in fact, it's the opposite. That's where I was going next. That's a great question. The way to think about it in a non-religious way is, let's say you had a bunch of kids in your school that were on a gymnastics team. And because they're future Olympians, we work it out that they're going to miss school a few times a week and they're going to get a bus that takes them. They're not our responsibility the moment we get on that bus until they come back. It is a completely non-school sponsored, non-school affiliated event, and it has to be. That's what Tim's getting at. So we don't have to send nurses, anything. It is almost like they're checked out and they come back in. In fact, it literally is like that. Yep. So that's where I was going next. That's a great question. The answer on advertisement, and I get that one a lot, is, so let's play this out. Okay, it's bigger than just that. Let's just say you got a Bible study in the morning, or kids want to run a prayer at the flagpole, or there's an FCA event on Friday night. Okay, that's the kind of stuff we're getting at, right? What I would say there is, and you guys know, there's this really difficult balance under the Establishment Clause of how we handle that. And really the way you handle it is, you're allowed to advertise it if that's what you do with other non-school sponsored stuff, okay? The one I always use is Boy Scouts. Okay, just use the Boy Scouts as your guide. And I don't always say that, but I'm going to say it there. So use the Boy Scouts as your guide. So how do you handle it if a Boy Scout troop called your school and said, we want to have an event on Saturday night, can you announce it? Would you say no or yes? Now, some of you are going to have different answers to that. Some of you literally, like my kid goes to, I'm going to get in trouble when I say this. I live in West Knoxville. My son goes to Farragut Middle, and they have a strict policy there that they don't announce any non-school related activities. They just don't. They'll put it in the newsletter, but that's it. You can do that, okay? It just needs to be consistent. So whatever policy, if you do announce Boy Scout meetings, if you do announce Girl Scout meetings, then you need to offer the same announcement concept to religious organizations. You would. Yeah, it would be the same. It would be the same.
Well, and here's what we said yesterday is that we're not sending home any flyers.
Right.
We're not putting any flyers of any kind, so if it's the Boy Scouts or anything. So what us as a group, we need to decide is how are we gonna do it? Are we gonna put it on, if there's something out, are you gonna put it on your Facebook site? You know, is that how you're going now?
Correct. Yeah, so and that's the way to think about it. Instead of dividing them, and you guys see where I'm going. Instead of dividing it in religious, non-religious, don't do it that way. It is anything non-school sponsored versus school sponsored. So anything non-school sponsored, if it's a religious club, a non-religious club, Boy Scouts, junior pro basketball, they all have to be treated the same with access. So if you decide, that's what we're getting at, if you decide I'm not sending home any flyers of anything non-school sponsored, you can do that. But you'd have to treat the Boy Scouts and the FCA the exact same way. That's how it works.
Would that also be allowing like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to come in for an appointment?
So there's a difference on that, and I realized when I said Boy Scouts out loud that was a mistake, because there is a state law that specifically allows Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to access the school during the school day.
Okay.
Sorry. So the Boy Scouts actually was a bad analogy. Tim probably realized it. So there is a specific state law that gives them more access than normal clubs. Yeah. And 4-H is the same. There's one other. 4-H is also different. 4-H is basically almost seen as a school activity now, and I'm going to show you a bill on that.
So when we get done here, we need to talk about that and figure out what y'all want to do.
And if I'm hearing the consistency standpoint correct, we're talking about social media, PA announcements.
Yep.
Any kind of way we transfer
Yep.
information.
Yep.
Correct? Okay.
Yeah, and so again, I'm not promoting this. I'm aware of it. And I'll tell you guys the reason I'm aware of it, because last year I agreed to coach the club team for Farragut Middle School soccer, right? So the way we got out our tryouts, I was told, and I was fine with this because I understood the policy, I was told you can't do an announcement, but we'll put it in the newsletter. We put all non-school related announcements in the newsletter, and they send it out as an email blast. That's totally fine. That's legal. You can do it that way. And they do stay consistent with it. So whatever you guys choose, if you're just going to use, that's what Tim's getting at. For non-school sponsored, if you're just going to use Facebook. For non-school sponsored, if you're just going to do a table at the front of the hallway that's got all the flyers on it, you could do any of those. It just has to be consistent. And the biggest thing you can get in trouble for is treating the religious groups differently than those other non-school sponsored activities. You just got to treat them the exact same way.
I guess I'm a little, just because there's a permission slip involved.
Sure.
And we're the ones.
Which ones? I'm sorry.
Well, we're the stuff.
Okay.
We have to collect the permission slips and all that, so I feel like there has to be some communication, like
Mhm.
you have to have the permission slip in by this time.
No, but it could just be the communication though in a newsletter or however you communicate the other stuff. Same thing again.
Vacation Bible school's a big one, or fall festivals at the churches and things like that. Those are the ones.
Easter egg hunts.
Yeah, we need to figure out how we want to do that so everybody's consistent.
The one thing that you don't want to do, and that's where Tim's going, is the cases where schools have gotten probably dinged the most on these issues is when we have our teachers specifically put a flyer in a folder or put something in a kid's box. That's the stuff where they say we're going too far. Because that's the step where they say, now you're using a school official to promote it. Making an announcement every now and then is actually not promotion, but taking a physical piece of paper and put it in a folder, they say is. So we do have to refrain from that. Okay.
Bible release, they can put it in the newsletter and then put a blurb that the kid could request a permission.
Sure. That would be fine. Question, yes ma'am.
So I have been asked about Bible release already this year. So is that something that they apply for every year, or if they've applied for it, they automatically?
It needs to be a permission slip every year.
Yeah, I
You're
know.
talking about the
I'm talking about the church.
I mean, once that's up to you. If you're okay with what they've done, is they just need to go over the rules and make sure whoever's got, there's a couple things, they gotta have a background check. You gotta make sure they got, like you say, you got that people, it's the same way as a field trip. You've gotta have, if you send 30 kids, they gotta have, the chaperone for every 10 and things like that. So as
So
long
if
as.
you've had good success the
Yes,
last time
I'm
you've had
fine
it,
with
they
that.
would send 6 adults and
Yes.
go walk up the street. As long as they don't have to apply.
No, they don't have to apply, but you would have to have the parents to do their permission slip every year.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions on these issues? And I'm going to jump where I'm going next before I go on the legislative update. And again, I'm going to give you guys breaks during the middle of this one too because it's long. Because you're sitting there thinking 39 slides, and me too. I'm thinking the same thing. I want to talk about student free speech for a second because we did have a case. This is what I talked about at summer law, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to touch on it because there's been a lot of misinformation about that case, in my opinion. So we did have a new case. How many saw it? So I'm going to call it the cheerleader case. See the cheerleader social media case? All right. So you guys know. I'm going to call it the BL case because I can never get anybody to tell me, is it for sure Mahoney, the school district name? I think it is, but I keep thinking I'm going to keep saying Mahoney, and then somebody's going to be watching TV and they say it the right way, and they're like, McCarty's an idiot. Well, that's true, but I also just got that name wrong. Okay, so BL is the kid's initials, so we'll say BL. So fun facts. I think they're fun because I'm a nerd. There's only been 5 cases now in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court on student free speech. 5 total. Okay? In 1969, there was Tinker, the most famous one. And I'm going to say this. This is the main reason I want to talk about the BL case. Tinker is still absolutely good law. And when I say good law, by the way, that doesn't mean I agree with every part of that case. That just means it's still the precedent we follow. Really, everything since Tinker works off of Tinker. It is the foundation of the house when it comes to free speech for students. And it still is. If you read the BL case because you want to have an easy time going to bed and going to sleep, the BL case really uses the same language and concepts from Tinker and just applies them to the students, social media stuff. So this case from 1969, the Mary Beth Tinker case, is still the case we go to, by far. Everything off that since. So the total number of cases that we had the Frazier case, which the Frazier case came in 1986. That is the case about the kid making the lewd speech at at a student assembly, promoting his buddy that's running for student assembly, that he sort of makes sexual innuendos the whole time. And that's what that case is about. The school system won that case. Then we have the Hazelwood case. The Hazelwood case is the student newspaper case, which basically says that, hey, if it's our student newspaper, we as the editors, we can decide what's in it or not. You don't have a free speech right to write any article you want to with our newspaper, right? Then you have the Morse case. A lot of people forget about the Morse case. Does anybody know that one? That was just in 2007. There you go. It was the Bong Hits for Jesus case. It's literally where, you guys thinking we're making that up. It's literally during a parade in the middle of school day, kids were allowed in Alaska to walk down the street and kind of watch the parade in the middle of school day. Very important. And they held up a banner that's like about 10 kids long that said Bong Hits for Jesus. And they got in trouble for that. I know it's a shocker, but they got in trouble for that. And my favorite part of the Frazier case, where this kid literally makes the most unencrypted lewd speech in the history of speeches, and the Bong Hits for Jesus case, my favorite part is just the parental aspect of that. Because I just imagine going home, and literally there were these kids that were like, we're going to take this to court. We don't think you should be punished for that. That would have not gone that way at my house. I promise you. If I came home and my dad saw in the newspaper a picture of me holding a sign up that said Bong Hits for Jesus, I would not be here right now. I would be dead and buried a long time ago. I would have never gotten gray hair, I'll tell you that much. It would have been really bad. But the Bong Hits for Jesus case, the Morse case we'll call it, basically also says during the school day, you have the right to enforce things like anti-drug policies, anti-drug language policies, anti-criminal activity policies. Because it was a student, they allowed them to go down there, but it was basically equivalent of a field trip. All right, so the reason I bring up those old cases is this new BL case is something totally different that we've never had before. All right, all those other cases, so Tinker, Frazier, Hazelwood, Morse, all those cases dealt with the same thing. What is it? Speech at school or in school-related event. All of those are just about the same. I mean, every single one of them. So student newspaper is at school event. Tinker is wearing an armband at school, right? Morse is the parade during the school day with teacher supervision. And Frazier is a student assembly speech. So the BL case is the first time the Supreme Court has ever dealt with off-campus speech with students. Ever. And I'll say this. The thing to also remember about BL, and I won't go through the whole thing, but it applies to all off-campus speech for students, not just social media. Now, right now you're thinking that's the only way they talk. I agree. But if they happen to have a verbal conversation again in their lives, that this would also apply there too. Okay, so let's talk about the facts of it real quick because I think it is an interesting case. The BL case was a student in Pennsylvania, BL. By the way, supposed to be anonymous, and the courts have never outed her, but she is all over the media now, kind of doing the spike in the football on that win, and her parents are too. But basically, she gets, y'all are going to be shocked, I know you were when you read it, that a case involving angry parents involved cheerleading. I had to throw that in. Come on. I had to throw that in. I'm having some fun. But I will say, just a quick aside, I never would have predicted this going into being a school lawyer, but if you said to me, just anecdotally, what are the two main things that you get pulled into that are extracurricular related? Cheerleading's one. No offense, it just is. Band is two. Band is two. And I'll say this, band parents are smart. And they know your policies better sometimes than we do. And they know how to write them in an email at 11:59, okay? So that's where that comes in. But going back, so the BL case is cheerleader is a freshman going into her sophomore year. Her freshman year, she was on the JV team before. She tries out for varsity. She doesn't make it. That does not go well. Anybody heard that story before? Okay. So she goes on Saturday night to a local convenience store and gets on Snapchat. I am happy in a weird, twisted way that the first Supreme Court case on student free speech involved Snapchat. I think it needed to, okay? I'll say that, because that is the one that is the bane of all of our existences, right? So she's posted on the Snapchat story, which I don't have to explain to y'all what that is. I did have to explain to that during the board, because I think a lot of board members might not know the difference of it. But the summer law this weekend. But basically, she gets on Snapchat story, and her friend at the convenience store, so not at school and on a Saturday night, look at the camera and give their best middle finger to the camera, and then create a meme that says, I think this is it, says, F school, she uses the real words, by the way, F school, F cheer, F life, I think is the last one. But basically, the two that mattered were F school, F cheer, okay? A couple of things that are important about that, and things that the court really focused on. She's not wearing any sort of school-affiliated items. She's definitely not wearing her cheerleading uniform. She doesn't say which school she goes to. She doesn't use a teacher's name. She doesn't say, F this cheerleading program, F these kids, anything like that. It is truly just school in general, cheer in general. And to the Supreme Court, that did matter. One of the things that came out of this case that is we're going to have to focus on moving forward is the difference between targeted and non-targeted. That's sort of where Justice Breyer goes. Is that's going to be a difference, right? It goes through the courts, and a little inside baseball, if you're interested, as to why I think the Supreme Court took the case. We've had a lot of student free speech cases. The Supreme Court, this is the first time they've jumped in. I think they jumped in not because this case was that different, is because the Third Circuit Court of Appeals went haywire in how they handled it. And I think the Supreme Court thought they had to fix that. Okay, because here's what the Third Circuit did. That's right underneath the Supreme Court. All the courts have been a little confused on it and been somewhat inconsistent. But the Third Circuit went crazy. And I'm saying that on the recording. They basically said in her favor, she won at the district level and at the Third Circuit level, but the Third Circuit basically said, we think all off-campus speech, schools can't do anything about. All. So literally you could have a situation under the Third Circuit's reasoning, and they went really extreme, where we could have a kid that's, let's say on a Saturday night, uses social media to threaten one of our kids and say, I'm going to beat up Jimmy on Monday at school. Third Circuit can't do anything about it. You're using it literally to break into the school system, computers, turn it into the cops. You can't do anything about it. I mean, that's how far the Third Circuit opinion went, was just, if it's off campus, we cannot get involved at all. And really what a lot of people understand is the BL case is the Supreme Court sort of coming back a little bit. It's more of a King Solomon opinion. Because when you see it kind of out of nowhere, you think, oh man, they really in favor of that kid. When you compare it to the Third Circuit, it's a split the middle kind of case. Okay? So what they did in this case is, basically, I think we do have to move forward thinking, that if it happens off campus, by default, we have to assume we might have to stay out of it if it happens off campus. So if it's social media on a Saturday night, by default, we have to assume that kid has the right to say that. Okay? Now, there's going to be exceptions, and that's where the court comes in. Justice Breyer, though, and also important about the case, is an 8-1 decision. The only justice that dissented was Justice Thomas. And if you know Justice Thomas's history, you guys are really seeing how big of a nerd I am on this stuff. But if you know Justice Thomas's history, this is not a Republican-Democrat thing with him. He is the most vocal proponent of schools never being liable that's ever existed. I mean, Justice Thomas thinks that basically, and I agree with him, I wish he was in charge on this, but that you should treat loco parentis, this is his idea, as we are literally the parents when they're not there. So the only way a school should ever get in trouble is if we physically abuse a kid. I mean, that's how far he takes it. Otherwise, we should leave schools alone and let them do their jobs. You can sort of amen that, but that is his position. So he's not, in my opinion, being Republican Democrat there. He's just always been the biggest school advocate that has ever existed on the bench. So 8-1 is all the other justices were like, oh no, this is how it's going to be. The reason I'm telling you that is this is going to be the law forever. When they agree like that, 8-1, this is going to be the law for 100 years. Okay? So going back to it, basically what Justice Breyer says is there are still examples of things where even if it's off campus, even if it's on social media and has nothing to do with school, you can still get involved. Okay? He gives 4 examples. One big one is bullying and harassment off campus of target individuals, so specific kids or teachers or employees or volunteers. So you absolutely can do something about that. Don't care if it happens on Saturday night or not. The second thing is a threat to a specific person or group, right? So if she would have said on there, F the cheerleading team, I'm going to bomb blank high school on Monday, you're darn right, we can do something about that. And then so I'm going to call that the targeted sort of threat harassment group. The other 2 things he talked about is what I call sort of technological violations. So if you find out on a Saturday night outside of school that one kid walked up to the teacher on Friday, the teacher wasn't there, and took a picture of the answer key, and then on Saturday they're all sharing that on Snapchat, you can punish for that. So basically, if kids are using technology outside of school to cheat, you can do something about it at school. And the other, number 4 is what I literally call the Ferris Bueller example. Anybody hopefully has seen Ferris Bueller? I mean, I still think it's a good movie. I will say it's funny when you watch that movie now and you think, there's no way that school system had a computer system at that time in the early 80s in which not only are the grades online, but you can access them through the internet, okay? But literally the Ferris Bueller example of he uses his computer in that movie to change his grades, his attendance, etc. If a kid did that on a Saturday night, yes, we can still punish over it. So those are the 4 examples Justice Breyer gives. Make sense? So the biggest message we're going to get from it now, I'm just going to summarize it this way, is if off-campus speech only offends, we're going to probably have to stay out of it.
Which for us is a good thing.
I think so too.
Because you don't have to deal with that parent that says such and such did this.
Yeah. Yeah, I said this during summer law, and that's Tim knows where I'm going with this. I admitted this, and I'll say it to you guys. There's part of me that was rooting for the kid a little bit. Because I think y'all have gotten so, and I've seen it because y'all talked to me about it. I mean, every Monday morning, y'all got 3 mamas, and that's usually a mama, okay? I mean, let's just be honest. The dad doesn't even know what's happened. No comment, but 3 mamas lined up outside your door with color printed. They've used the color printer for it, because that, right? With screenshots of Snapchat or Instagram DMs or whatever, and they want you to do something about it. So now a lot of times we can say, you do have to analyze it and see if it involves targeted bullying, harassment, or threats. See where I'm going? If it doesn't, I think we have to politely look at mom and dad and say, sorry, Supreme Court says we got to stay out of that now. Okay, yes, sir.
What if we have a kid that gets on social media, football players got his football jersey
Okay, let's talk about that.
He's drinking a beer.
Mm-hmm.
A cheerleader.
I'm glad you brought that up.
On social media.
Right. Hopefully we didn't save that video, but no, I'm joking. So no, but that's a great.
Harrison County, they did football, they're legal because they're 21 now.
Oh, that's pretty good.
He's the damn boss.
I will say, we were joking during the break. Is it okay if I say this? I always had a buddy growing up, one of my best friends from Campbell County High School, and he went to Jacksboro Middle, and he said, I didn't play ball in high school with anybody I went to middle school with. They were all at Anderson County. So we just play. Darn right, that Jacksboro Middle team was always good. They were also about 17 years old in middle school. Okay, one other aside I'll throw on this. I'm not joking. One time, I'm moving away from Anderson County here. We'll just tell one quick war story on that. The worst I've ever been beaten on a football field, and that's a long list, was playing center against Alcoa Middle in 8th grade. And the kid across from me, I swear to you, was like 6'4", about, you guys know. No joke, after that game, that kid got in the car and drove off. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, I literally watched him. His cleat mark was forever in my back, okay? I mean, he beat me like a pulp, okay? When my dad said good game after that, I said, Dad, you're a liar, okay? I mean, like literally, that kid got in the car and drove off. I watched it from the bus. But anyway, so moving on. Biggest thing to remember from the BL case, let's go back to what Greg said. One thing I do think we have to be careful about moving forward are our team contracts and are like what we call our player codes of conduct, things like that. Can you still do those? So let's just kind of go through some examples. My bottom line on it is yes. And let's imagine if it's 10 things long, now it might just be 8. Okay, that's the thing to think about. We might have to rethink some of the breadth of it, but let's just go through some basic examples. I'm going to use what you said. Could you still absolutely put something in a player code of conduct that says, you are not to use, as a member of this team, on or off campus, alcohol, illegal drugs, or tobacco? Yes. That has nothing to do with free speech. You could absolutely ban that. We can ban illegal activity on or off campus, okay? We can make our kids do that. Could you also say, you are not going to threaten, abuse, bully any kids on or off campus as a member of this team? Darn right, you could. You're not going to threaten, abuse teachers or be disrespectful to them. That's not free speech, right? So that, yes, you could still do that. Another one that you brought up, which I think is really important, and Justice Breyer talks about this a little bit in a coded way, is if the kid is wearing our uniform, I think we have every right to say how you are or are not allowed to behave while wearing our uniform. That is still the case, right? And that kind of goes back to the Hazelwood case, because the Hazelwood case is a school newspaper case, but it's bigger than that. It talks about if the students or the public would believe, because of what the kid's saying or where they're saying it or how they're saying it, that it's on behalf of the school system or we're endorsing it, then we have more business to it. So if you're wearing your uniform, you can absolutely say you're not to do this on social media with our uniform on, et cetera. You see where I'm going? I think that where I'm going, though, is if you did have a school policy or code of conduct for players that says you're never to act inappropriate on social media or use foul language, I think we probably have to nix that one. Because really what the court's saying here is we're not going to go so far that we're going to tell kids how to behave at Burger King on a Saturday night. As long as they're not literally, chugging beer, okay? And let me defend that a little bit. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I will see. Let's talk about the logic of it. So the famous line that the court, I say it'll be famous amongst nerds like me, but that Breyer used in this case that we're forever going to remember is, schools are the nurseries of democracy. That's what he says. The nurseries of democracy. And really what he's getting at in that is we have to protect the First Amendment. They sort of say this in the court, we've come to a point in the country, right, where people get offended on both sides for everything. Well, really what he's saying is if we don't start allowing kids to have free speech rights and defending those rights, even in schools, they're going to get offended when they're 30. They're going to think that every time you talk, the government should be able to shut them up. And that's sort of where he's going, right? The other thing I would say there is, let's play this out. And I had to think through this a lot, but the more I thought about it, it made sense. When I was growing up, I may or may not at some point in my life have complained about a coach. Okay, I know it's shocking. But I didn't have a cell phone, okay? And where did I do that? Literally at Burger King on Chapman Highway, because I spent a lot of time there. And I might be with my buddy eating a Whopper and saying, man, coach is being a jerk this week. Did I get in trouble for that? Would you have ever dreamed that I would have gotten in trouble for that? No. Now, though, they get in trouble because they type it. But in speech world, in legal world, there's no difference. So I think part of what the court's saying is we got to be a little careful that just because this stuff is on social media, we're not treating it differently than we've treated speech for 50 years. And we got to let kids be kids sometimes.
Is there no difference from
You never do that.
Never. That's never happened in the time I've known. And I tell Nate that I'm mad at him.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is, though, the only person that knows that
I know.
is Nate.
Right.
If I write it
Yep.
and post it on
Yep.
on Twitter, which I have thought about doing, and tweet
Yep.
it, all three of my followers then know that I'm mad at him.
Yep. No, I agree with you, and that's where I think the court. I think that's where the court, though, is going with the targeted part, right? Because it is this weird balance that we're going to have to acknowledge that, yeah, kids just don't do anything privately anymore. They don't have that private conversation at Burger King. It's always going to be 200 people that know, but we still have to defend their ability. Because if we don't defend their ability to say things that are stupid, then everybody's ability to say things that are stupid gets harder. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I agree with you. That's where I think the court's saying, though, yeah, we're still going to let you do something about it.
It just seems more potent. If
No, oh, it is. It is more potent.
Or public versus private.
It is. But I think what the court's saying is, but free speech in general is still so important to defend, right? Yes, sir.
Could we create some kind of like athletic civility code?
Sure.
I know that civility codes can be used sometimes to cover that, and
Mhm.
they have to be used to kind of limit.
But even there, though, I think you have, yes is my answer, but you even have to go, you can't go as far as maybe you could 3 months ago. You see what I'm saying? Like if you literally said you can't cuss. You could say you can't cuss at school, on the team, in the bus. I don't think you can say now you can't cuss on social media.
Because I mean, they used to send a civility code to parents for
Oh, I know.
a football game.
Oh, there's no doubt. No, but I think that this is even, the court's even saying with the civility code, you'd have to be more careful. That kids are still, when they're not under our control off campus, we're going to have to back up a little bit. We're going to have to let the reins out a little bit on that.
Is less not more? I mean, you got to be careful when you start putting things in writing. You know, you can't
Sure.
do this, you can't do this, you can't do.
Yeah.
When you didn't say I couldn't smoke weed out of a bong,
Sure.
you just said I couldn't smoke weed. I mean.
Yeah.
And so that, and I'm asking this for most of our coaches normally are the ones that have these
Sure.
codes or have these extra rules.
Sure.
Is there any difference that will they look? And obviously with this cheerleading event, it's a little. They didn't, so I guess it answers my question. But this school-wise, you have a right to school.
Sure.
Extracurriculars.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that
don't
up.
have a right to extracurriculars. It's
Yep.
a privilege. And as a coach, it's my team, and you violated my policy. Do I have to state what policy is? If you keep posting TikToks and say the F word, 6 times per 30-second TikTok, sorry, I'm done with you.
So, okay, let's play that out. I think what you just said, there's a couple things really important in there. So I'm going to pull them both out. Is that okay?
How fast the kid is being number one?
I would argue how fast and can he catch. Okay, because, hey, fast doesn't matter if you can't catch. But going back to it, no, the first thing you said is really, really important, which is probably the biggest surprise for lawyers of this case, was that they didn't talk about the difference between a privilege and a right. They just didn't talk about it. And that was shocking. I mean, honestly, we've dealt with years and years of the courts telling us there's a massive difference between a right, which is attending school, and a privilege, which is playing on extracurricular activity or being a member of a team. Breyer left that out completely. And remember, what's important about this case is, to your point, she was not suspended from school. I mean, her only punishment was kicked off the cheerleading team. That was it. She had no school-related punishment, what I would call school day-related punishment. It was just kicked off the cheerleading team. And Breyer still said that's too far under the First Amendment. So they've made us rethink the privilege versus right stuff. And we're kind of grappling with that. I'm hoping the lower courts help us out some more, but they've sort of reset us on that. That's the biggest shocker that came out of this.
So the thinking is, had she been more specific, this team sucks, this coach sucks, this school sucks, then they could have.
Yeah, so the one thing that came out of it for sure is the targeting. So like if it's targeted complaints, yes, this school stinks, my cheerleading sponsor's a jerk, they absolutely could have done something there, because that would have been harassment of an individual, which is the first example Breyer gave. But going back to your second point, I agree with you that, and I'm typically the first person to say, I hate a lot of policies, because more policies means more stuff that we can mess up on and be inconsistent with. I will say though, because of this case, if you want to regulate off-campus activity of team players, I think you're going to have those player codes of conduct. I think you're going to have to. And because the court is very clear also in this about expectations. And if we're not setting the expectations for the kids clearly, then really you get into, well, you're just the government overreach.
So if you set the I want to make sure, because
Yeah, I'm with you. Sure.
So if we set the expectations that you can't be a moron and low character, and everything that you post, obviously you wouldn't write it that way, but
That's okay.
That your TikToks can't be full of, you see what I'm saying?
I do. I think where you're not going to like my answer though is, if the only thing that kid's doing on TikTok is cussing or posting rap lyrics, even if they're on your team, I think we're probably have to kind of turn a blind eye to it.
That's my question.
Unless they're wearing your jersey. Or saying, or even in the comments, this is on behalf of my teammates, this is how, that kind of thing. Hashtag the school. Anytime they involve us, I think that's different.
But if they're just low character, it doesn't matter now.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I know what you mean. Yeah. No, I'm not arguing with you. I agree with you. Yeah. In a lot of ways, and again, I'm having to defend parts of this case that I definitely don't agree with. And you know that. But I will say this. The thing this is what's going to be real hard. I'll say it out loud about this case. And then I'm going to give you guys a break. The thing about this case that's real hard is, if you said to me now, could a private school regulate that stuff all day? Yes. But what they're saying to us is, we're still the government. Like, we're a public school system, but we're the government. And the government under the First Amendment cannot infringe upon free speech. And they're saying that when we as school systems are getting involved, and one of the things Breyer talks about in the case is, how far do we go? Like, we've almost come to the point where 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's our business. And he says, I think legitimately, is that right? Is that a good thing? That schools are watching kids or dealing with stuff that's happening 24/7? That wasn't the way it worked when we were kids, right? And I get it.
And even, we had a guy come just a couple of years ago who was an aide with the new governor up north, and he ultimately lost his job because of some things that he posted on Twitter when he was in college. He's sitting in the limo with the governor, and he says, "Hey, I'm sorry, I got to let you go." And it wasn't anything. He wasn't picking at anybody. He wasn't being. He just some stuff he posted.
Yeah.
And they canned him, and he came in and talked to our kids. Hey, be careful what you post on.
So that is a really thing. And you're seeing the courts struggle with that right now, and you're seeing different courts all over the world. So for example, European courts right now, and I'm not always pro-European Union courts, I promise you, but one thing that they're struggling with and kind of flirting with is the idea of the right to be forgotten online, right? And the right that, let's say 10 years, this is some of the stuff that's getting talked about over there, and I think you're going to start seeing it here too. So maybe 10 years after something's been posted online, you should have the right to go to Google and say, hey, I want this. I don't want anybody to be able to search for this anymore. That happened 10 years ago when I was 20. I'm 30 now. This should come out of your algorithm. And literally the court's saying that's a good thing. Like
social media, and this is a conversation I've had with our staff.
Yeah.
Is like social media doesn't give you. Social media doesn't give you the right to change.
Agreed.
When I was 20,
we've got pictures.
I'm sure. My political ideas may have been X, Y, Z.
Hold on, guys. We can't hear, and it's on video. That's what I'm worried about.
But when I depending on when you live, then I went through the Vietnam War, and then I experienced this, and then I experienced that, and now I'm 50. I have more liberal leaning, I did feel that way when I was 20, but now I'm 50, and I don't feel that way at all. And social media doesn't allow you that. It's like, here you are, here you are in a Nixon rally, and then here you are, marching in a pride parade.
I think about that a lot. This is a weird example, but Charlton Heston is an interesting one. If you guys know Charlton Heston's history, he started out as a very vocal, very liberal, when he was first an actor, very, very left. By the time he died, he was president of the NRA. You really couldn't have that anymore. Like, they wouldn't let you, because somebody would pull your tweets from your 20 and say you're not allowed to be conservative when you're 50. We had that situation, not that I read this magazine, but I think it was the editor of Teen Vogue. It was I know, a shocker. I don't read the magazine, but I think it was Teen Vogue, but it was an editor of a teen magazine where she is now well into her 30s, and they brought back tweets that she made when she was in high school and early college, and they fired her. And she was like, I mean, that's where we've come to. I mean, I think we are, in a good way, starting to see the courts and the legislature start to say people should be allowed to change. People should be allowed to move on from something they did when they're in high school. And we've seen professional athletes that are getting tweets brought up when they're 16. I mean, golly, please don't ever bring up anything I wrote when I was 16. Okay, let's take about 5 minutes. Thanks, guys. I'm now officially going to get into the legislative update. This is the Tennessee legislative update. I got to give another disclaimer before I jump into this one. I promise you, there's only going to be one bill that you're going to hear my real Chris McCarty opinion on. Whether you want it or not, I'm going to give it on one. The rest of this, if you're hearing me talk about it, I promise I'm not taking a political position. There's some of these that are very political bills. Okay, let's just get into it. Let's be honest about it. The only thing I care about on these bills is how is it going to affect you guys practically? Like, how are we going to deal with it practically? That's all I care about. So if you hear me have any issues with it, that's the only thing it would come from. Okay? Now, off the record, I might have opinions on all this. That's not my job, though. My job as a school attorney is not to take political positions. It's to figure out how the law works and what the potholes are for us. That's it. Okay? So some of these are not that political. I will say this. I'm going to start with this one because I think it illustrates an interesting thing that we're watching. And I don't care to say this recorded because it's just a fact. There's this really interesting battle going on right now. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it's a battle between the state legislature and the governor's office and two school systems. Really, two city governments. And what are those? And Metro. Yeah, so Shelby and Metro. I mean, there's just this. And it got worse last year. By the way, they were already in lawsuits with each other, like for years worth of lawsuits that are still going on. And then last year when Shelby and Metro wouldn't open, and that was not going the way everybody else thought it should, that's just made the divide a lot rougher. So some of these bills this year have been interesting to me because I think you can almost see, I'm going to use a baseball analogy, a brushback pitch to Shelby and Metro in some of this legislation. And this is one of them. So Public Chapter 96, one thing I'm going to say is you guys can have these slides. I mean, they're literally, if anybody needs them, wants them, has trouble falling asleep, you can use them. I'm going to put the effective date always at the top left. Usually the effective date is always going to be effective now or soon. This year it's different. They really kind of scattered about some that are not effective until next year. There's one big bill for us that's not effective until January for some reason. So just look at that as well. This bill basically says, the first paragraph is always how it's worked, which is if we're in a public health emergency, local school boards have the right to open or close. That's always been the case. Now there's a second part to that now. However, if the governor issues an executive order with statewide applicability that requires schools to be open for in-person learning, that trumps the local order. So hypothetically, if we go into... Didn't mean for it to be if it was. My brain doesn't work that way anymore. Yeah. Oh, no, I didn't mean for that. I'm staying away from anything related to two names today, Trump and Biden. I'm just going to not use either name because I don't want to set people off either way. But moving on, so basically, hypothetically, if you were to go into this year and one of those two school systems said, we're not going to open for in-person, you're going to quickly see an order from the governor that's going to say you're opening in person. And then you're going to see courts fighting about whether that's valid or not. If you want my opinion, which I'm not saying you do, I think this is a valid law. Okay, and there's a reason for that. It's not just because I'm pro-governor or whatever. The reason for it is, if you go back to our state constitution, I mean, really the power and the responsibility for educating kids is the state's responsibility that they delegate locally. But fundamentally, it's a state responsibility. So the governor really has the ultimate control over education. Okay, and if state legislature wants to give him more power, specific power, I think they can do it. So it's going to be interesting how that works. Okay, the second one is Bill 100013. This prohibits state and local authorities from requiring a person to be COVID vaccinated. So people have asked that. Could we require students to be vaccinated? Whether we'd want to or not is not my question. Could we do it? No. Could we require employees to? No. Because a lot of you guys have seen there's been hospitals around the country that are requiring vaccination. We in the state of Tennessee could not do that. Okay, we have a state law that says we can't do that. 369. This requires schools, nursery schools, preschools, etc., to provide instructions, and every time they send out on anything on immunizations, that there are exemptions to immunizations. And the two basic exemptions are religious exemption and what I'm going to call an ADA, physical limitations exemption, right? So if you had a kid that's going through chemo, if you had a kid with autoimmune disorder, there's exemptions for those things, okay? Again, these are pretty self-explanatory. I won't spend too much time on those. All right, this is I just throw that up there because I love 4-H. So just for fun, what are the 4-H's? Come on. I always like to say who can do it. Head, yep, okay. And this one basically says, requires a public school to credit a student who participates in all activity. Bottom line, if they're going to a 4-H related activity, they're at school. We treat it the same way we would a field trip. So for attendance purposes, they didn't miss school that day. That's basically what this bill says. Now, they cannot use a 4-H trip to miss TCAPs. We can count them absent for that. I don't think they would. And they cannot use a 4-H trip to avoid suspension. So if you had a kid that said, hey, I'm going to be in that 4-H trip, no, you can still say, no, you're suspended. Okay, now the 4-H sponsor can say you're still going, but you're still suspended for us, so we're going to still make you play out that suspension. Does that make sense? I do have to tell, I think this is a funny story. You guys decide. So I was pretty involved growing up in 4-H in Seymour. Really in middle school, very involved. Used to go to 4-H camp and everything. And I like to tell on myself on this one. My dad managed a little bank in Seymour, so I'm not going to tell you I know anything about cars, livestock, anything. I don't. I'm just not good at anything like that. I'm pretty useless when it comes to many things. And so literally my 4-H sponsor had a hard time because I was in honors. You have to work the county fairs. If anybody did that growing up, you know. You have to work Jefferson County Fair, Cobb County Fair, Anderson County Fair, all of them, Knox County Fair. That's what you do. And she was having to figure out what to do with me because I was useless. And at some point, she must have figured out that I was husky as well. I think it was pretty obvious. And she came up to me and said, Chris, we've got a spot open in banana bread. And I said, I'll do it. And it was me, for 3 years, it was me and these two little old ladies that for all the county fairs would judge banana bread. Her name was Mildred, and she taught me a lot about banana bread. So I still love banana bread, but I'm very picky about it. Okay. But I just love the visual now. I mean, back then I thought it was great. You know, I go to free, eat all the county fairs, eat all I wanted. They literally made me eat. And I just imagine just me waddling in there and just like, yep, don't like it. It had to be amazing. All right. See, I told you that story because now I was going to this. All right. So the Public Chapter 40, this is already effective, is what I'm going to call the Transgender Athletics Bill. All right, so for purposes of participation in public middle school or high school interscholastic activity or event must be determined by the student's sex, that's a typo, at the time of the student's birth as indicated on the student's original birth certificate. Okay, so let's break that down first. Without getting into the politics of it, let's just break that down first. First of all, it says public middle school or high school interscholastic activity. What does that mean? The way I read that is school-sponsored, school-sanctioned activity. So a lot of us have club teams that might call themselves the Clinton Soccer Club. You see what I'm saying? Different stuff, like middle school teams. Like I just explained it. So I coached the Farragut middle school team. We're not affiliated with Knox County Schools. We just call stuff that because all the kids go to Farragut Middle, right? We get no money. There's no sponsor. There's no anything. So for those club teams, those non-school sanctioned teams, we're not getting involved. I hope I can say that. I mean, that's just not the decision of the school system. That's not what this bill applies to. It is just our sports. So typically, what does that mean? That's going to be TSSAA sanctioned sports or TMSSAA sanctioned sports. Do you guys have any clubs or that you're literally providing money to or school sports that are not TMSSAA or TSSAA? Yep. One? Swimming. Okay, but that's governed by some sort, and it's still interscholastic though.
It's still TSSAA.
Okay, so there's still a regulatory agency. So yeah, so we're still going, that would still apply. So it's still a school sanction. The reason I'm bringing that up though is this. One thing that I am saying to all school systems is the TSSAA rule on this, if you've already seen it, a lot of you have, is they're going to follow the state law. They've said it. It's in writing now. So TSSAA is following the state law on this. So what am I saying to school systems? And you guys decide what you want to do, but my recommendation is this. If you got a call tomorrow as to whether a kid is eligible because they transferred, who makes that call, you or TSBA? Right, and who would you call? You call Gene or somebody else, right? This is an eligibility determination. To me, it's no different than us asking a question about a transfer. At the end of the day, it is this kid eligible to play on this team in an interscholastic activity? So we're going to let TSBA make the decision every time. The same way we would on transfers. You guys say why I'm doing that, right? I'm going to be blunt about it, and I'll say it on camera. One, I'm passing the buck. Okay? Yes, I know I'm doing that. And I'll tell you why in a second. And two, I'm coming to you in just a second. And two, I'm also making sure that I think we're all better off if we do that, because now we're going to get consistent decisions. There's going to be one decision maker, TSBA, and they're making the decision for all these rather than every school system kind of deciding how they're going to do it. Just let the eligibility be handled the way we've always let eligibility be handled. Make sense? Because we know what they're going to do. Is that okay to say that? The other thing I'm going to say is why. And I'm going to come to that, I promise. My criticism, this is an apolitical criticism of this bill, is not what it is. It is anytime the state puts forth a bill for us that we know is a political battleground bill, and this is, I don't care what your politics are, it's a battleground bill. I wish they would say that, and I'll say this to any legislature that asks me. At the end of that bill, they should do this. They should put a paragraph in that basically says, and by the way, we know we're setting school systems up to get sued. We'll cover your legal costs. They never do that, okay? And that's my frustration. So they put us out here to do it, and then we deal with the legal tab. And I really don't want to get us sued. Somebody is going to get, multiple systems are going to get sued over this bill. And if we can be the ones that don't, it just means there's more money to hire teachers. That's how I feel, okay? So that's what that's about. I'm not being mean to TSBA. I just think they know, I'll bet you $1 million right now without talking to Bernard that in their budget, they have put aside legal fees for this year because they know they're going to get sued over this bill. I'll bet you any amount of money. If they didn't, they made a massive financial mistake. So let's just let them handle it, is the way I look at it, okay? And let the state handle it. So question.
This might be a question for Tina Melissa Deleva. I'll see if you know. One sport comes to mind, wrestling.
Sure.
Girls have
Yep.
been allowed to wrestle boys in wrestling and stay within that. Is that going to affect that? Is that something we need to?
So that's an interesting question, and I'm not, so I can't answer that. In one way, what we have to look at is, even if you go to the TSBA's website, and you guys know this, a lot of times they'll say girls volleyball, or they'll say girls basketball, boys basketball, you know what I mean? But you'll notice that they don't say boys football, and they don't actually say, people forget this one, they don't say boys baseball. So really what that comes down to is there's a lot of what we call non-gendered sports, right? So going to your question is, could a girl still play football? Yes, because football is a non-gendered sport. We don't actually say you have to be a boy or a girl. We just have football teams. Baseball is actually the same. People always think that there's a softball equivalent, and there is. But baseball, technically, if you ask TSBA, they'll always tell you that if a girl wants to play baseball, she has the ability to try out because it's a non-gendered sport. Okay, wrestling's a tough one because sometimes now it just depends. If your school doesn't offer girls wrestling, then I would say you still have a traditional non-gendered wrestling team. So that girl could still probably play. Whereas like schools like Heritage, I think for many years have had a girls. You guys have a girls team? Yes, so in that situation, it would apply in a weird, does that make sense? Could a boy play softball? Technically, no. There's where there's inconsistencies. No. And I'll tell you a little inside, it's funny to say inside baseball on this topic, but I'm on camera when I say this, so I don't mind. You can call me in if I'm wrong. I'll bet you any amount of money right now that the sport that'll get sued over is girls volleyball. Like the sport that will have the big lawsuits over will be girls volleyball. Does anybody want to predict why? One, it lets you get into court quicker because when's the season? Right now. Right? They're not going to wait for girls basketball season to file the suit, guys. ACLU is going to pick the sport that gets them in court faster, and that's going to be girls volleyball. The other reason is, and you hit on it sort of, which is there is no boys volleyball. Right? So if that person that was born a boy wants to play volleyball, they don't have any option unless they play for the girls team. See where I'm going? So that gives them a more factual significant argument because there is no equivalent boys sport. So I will bet you any amount of money that girls volleyball is your target cat. It could be cross country as well, but that just gets you in the court faster. A little strategy there. I hope I didn't just give them an idea, but I'm pretty sure they're ahead of me on that one. And if the ACS is watching this video, that's weird. So what else was I going to mention on this? Okay, now let me be very clear before I go to this next slide. And I'm going to spend some more time on some of these laws, obviously the big ones, then I'll kind of breeze through the others. Okay, so again, you'll have the slides if you want it. But unequivocally, I got to say this real quick, this is the law. And again, this is what TSSAA and TMSSAA is going to do. So there is no option. This is what we're going to do this year. Even if Anderson County Schools or Metro or anybody else said, oh, we're not going to follow this, I don't know how they would do it because they don't control eligibility, TSSAA does. So that's just what it is, okay? But I want to be honest with you guys, and don't shoot the messenger on this one. I have to be honest with you where I think the law is going in the future. So let's talk about it for a second. One, if you're following the courts, just yesterday, there's been only a few states so far that have passed these transgender athlete bans. One of those states was West Virginia. That law was struck down yesterday already. Season hasn't even started. They've already blocked it there with an injunction. Federal court has. That's going to come here. There's going to be one filed here, and I got to be honest with you as to where we're going. Okay? So let's go a little background. Bostock is a case that came out last summer. Bostock was a Supreme Court decision on Title VII and employment. All right, so what's Bostock about? Bostock was about does Title VII, which Title VII is something we've always known, right? It is workplace discrimination law. Been around since the Civil Rights Act started in the 60s, right? And workplace discrimination under Title VII basically says this. You can't be fired, discriminated against based on your gender, your religion, you guys know what it all says, your race, color, etc., right? So that law has, again, been around for a while. And the big question for the Supreme Court last year, in its mid-year term, was, is sexual orientation and gender identity protected under gender protection under Title VII? So basically, does Title VII protect you in the workplace based on sexual orientation and gender identity? Here's something that a lot of people don't know. Last spring, if you'd have told me, if you'd asked me, Chris, take away morals for a second, take away right, wrong, don't care about that here, I'm saying legal. If you'd have said to me last spring in Tennessee, would it be legal to fire somebody over their sexual orientation? I would have said yes. There wasn't anything protecting sexual orientation or gender identity in Tennessee or a lot of states, and there was no federal protection last spring. Now I would tell you 100% you're protected for sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace in the whole country, because last year the Supreme Court issued the case in Bostock. All right, another important thing about Bostock, you can kind of follow the court. It was not written by a liberal justice. It was written by Justice Gorsuch. Justice Gorsuch is a Trump appointee. I said I wasn't going to say a name, but I had to because I explained it. It was joined by Justice Roberts, a Bush appointee, and also joined by the liberal justice. It was a 6-3 decision. It's not going to go anywhere for a while. Justice Gorsuch and Roberts, unless somebody gets sick, are going to be on the Supreme Court a long time. They're both pretty young. I think Justice Gorsuch is like mid or early 50s. So what I'm telling you is we had a monumental case that came out last year that for the first time federally said parts of the Civil Rights Act protect sexual orientation and gender identity. Why does that matter? Because what is another branch of the same Civil Rights Act? Title what? Title IX. And what applies for our students? Title IX. It's gender protection in the student situations. That includes sports. That includes bathrooms. That includes everything. Any way in which we could discriminate against a student under Title IX applies. So now what the courts are dealing with is, okay, wait a minute. So the Supreme Court said sexual orientation and gender identity can be read into Title VII. Well, Title IX is a branch of the same tree. And a lot of the courts so far are saying, oh, well, yeah, well, then we're going to apply it to Title IX too. And last October, we had a Fourth Circuit case, which is Virginia, in which this case has been going on a long time. And it was a case about, you guys have probably heard about it before, it was a case about a student who was born a girl that identified in high school as a boy, that petitioned the school and the school board to utilize the boys' restrooms. Now, I want to be very clear, because right now you're thinking, well, they'll just give them a private one. That's literally what the school system did. The school system from the start did not say you have to use the girls' restroom. They said you can use the girls' restroom, or we'll give you a private bathroom. They said that from the start. And the kid said, not good enough. The ACLU said, not good enough. And now the Department of Justice says, not good enough. And after Bostock last year, the Fourth Circuit said, not good enough. This case literally said that student has a right to use the bathroom of the gender the student identifies with at the time. Not a private bathroom. The current Department of Education position on bathrooms is, and by the way, that's not Tennessee state law, but I'm just telling you guys where things are going. It is that kid gets to use the bathroom of the gender they identify with, and if you give them a private bathroom only, that is discriminatory. That's what they say.
Safety question.
I understand. Keep going. I didn't breathe during that part. I was waiting for somebody to throw something at me.
Let me take a jump from bathrooms to PE classes.
Got it. Do it.
And say that this individual wants to go.
Locker room.
Correct.
Got it.
There's 30 boys.
Yep.
In that room, and she hasn't started, he or she, whatever,
Yep.
Hasn't started doing whatever, the transition. I mean, she's got the equipment of a she.
Yep.
And I'm putting her in the, I mean, like, and there's 20 boys in there changing clothes. Which,
Yep.
You know, I mean, like, how can we, like, I assume the responsibility would then fall on us putting someone in there, which would be kind of odd since she's got the equipment of a girl.
Right.
You got to have another male staff member to be
That's
in there.
Chambers' job.
To make sure. Chambers! You know, you have to put a male staff member in there to make sure the goods and services don't exchange aisles.
Yeah. The goods and services don't exchange.
What's sad is we know what he's talking about.
I absolutely know what he's talking about, and it took me off for a minute. Okay, hold on a second. I got a lot thrown at me there. Somebody didn't go to CrossFit, and they're thrown into a locker room. It's part of what I got thrown in there. Okay, I get what you're asking me, and let me divide it into two places, okay? One is, right now in the state of Tennessee, state law is very clear. That kid would have to go to the bathroom, either private bathroom or private locker room, or the bathroom of which they were born into, okay, or the locker room. That's state law right now. Now I'm going to switch that because that's what you're asking me. If you ask me to predict, and I don't like to be Nostradamus, and hey, maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong many times. That's my wife, okay? But in 2 years, if you ask me how will that work under federal law, I'm going to tell you, I think it'll work that kid will get to go into the locker room and the bathroom of the gender they identify with.
Have they changed their identity from day to day?
That's also interesting. No, let's talk about that. I mean, that's what, to me, again, taking all opinions out of it, let me just talk logistics. Because you guys are bringing up, I think, very valid points. One of the hardest things that I have to deal with in thinking this through logistically is, as you guys know, a lot of the proponents for these things believe that gender is fluid, right? So if gender is fluid, I can go ahead and tell you that the Department of Education federally's opinion on it's going to be it's fluid. So yes, it could change.
So it's as of now, it's discriminatory.
No.
Bathroom, right?
No, I'm sorry. It is, and that's why I'm going to be very clear. We have not had, let me go backwards for a second. That's why I'm trying not to confuse this. I'm not doing a good job. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is the Court of Appeals we care about, okay? Because that's Tennessee, Ohio, Michigan, and Kentucky, okay? The Sixth Circuit has not issued an opinion on this. So in Tennessee right now, let me go back through the law. Transgendered athlete bill still applies. In Tennessee right now, if a kid requested to use a bathroom of a different gender, no, you would give them a private facility or the one they're born into. Is that okay to say? If they want to use a different locker room, no, they're going to use private facility like a coach's locker bathroom, or they're going to use the one they were born into. That's Tennessee right now. What I'm telling you though is, if and when the Sixth Circuit goes the same way the Fourth Circuit went, immediately all that's going to change. Okay? Does that make sense? I know that's confusing.
There's no sense in having a men's and women's bathroom. You just need to let kids. I mean, you take Travis Freeman back in the day. He's going to just say, "I'm going in as a girl."
So. So apparently there was a good CrossFit session this morning. All right, so see, I'm going to use it now. It's funny you say that, so I'm going to say this. This is not a good thing that I'm necessarily saying I was right about this, but 5 years ago, at least 5 years ago, I was at the TSBA Summer Law, and I was talking about this issue, and literally somebody said that. Somebody said, do I think that in 20 years we're going to have different bathrooms? I really don't. I think that you're going to, I mean, my joke, and it's really not a joke anymore, is I wouldn't invest in a urinal company. I mean, I think what you're going to see long term, and I'm not trying to tell you guys how to build a school, but I think I'm hearing a lot of people say this. Long term, what we're probably going to more see is unisex bathrooms with stalls down to the floor.
I've already started a business.
Mm-hmm. I'm not joking anymore. I used to joke I wouldn't invest in urinal companies. I'll say it on the record. I would not invest in a urinal company right now because I really don't think in large facilities, public places, you're going to see them anymore. I think it's just going to be unisex bathrooms long term.
That's a little bit different in the locker room.
Oh, I know. No, I know. That's even harder, and I agree with you.
Dressing pods.
Okay. So again, let me say this. Let me put a bow on it. A non-gendered bow. Right now in Tennessee, transgender athlete bill is still the law. Bathrooms, we handle it the same way we did last year. I'm just letting you guys know already. The reason I'm bringing this up is just yesterday we had a West Virginia court strike down the transgender athlete bill. That could happen tomorrow in Tennessee. We don't know. And when it happens, I just want you guys to be aware that it could happen quickly. Okay? All right. Told you it's going to be a fun legislative update. All right. And I'm going to say this. And I'll say this one. I told you when oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr.
Just last thing.
You're fine.
I think I do already know the answer, but it's really, really hard for me to wrap my mind around this. With your one hole bathrooms, is it also part of the law that says that can only be so far away as far as accessible by a student? For example, if I'm on the bottom floor,
oh, I know what you're saying.
300 feet to get to this bathroom, that's not okay, that I have to provide a bathroom within 100 feet?
Not necessarily. No, it's not really in there. It's got to be reasonable, but no, there's nothing that says it can't be farther than the normal bathroom. Okay. No, you could do that. Now, what I would say to you is the way we've always handled that in the past is try to give them, if the kid is like, if you have the freshman hallway and the closest private bathroom is the coach's locker room, then just use it. Just use the closest one. But there's nothing in there that prescribes feet or anything. No. That's a good question. Okay, now I'm going to say this. I put these two right here together because I knew when I did this legislative update this year that these would be the two that would get the most reaction. This is the next one. So this is the Teacher Discipline Act. I told you before that I was going to give my personal opinion on one bill. This is it. I hate this bill, okay? I think it's a bad bill. Now, I'll say to anybody that wants me to say it, don't care, I'll say it. I think from an educational standpoint, this is a bad bill. Let me show you why. Now, the first slide is not anything different. It's not anything crazy. In fact, what I would say is this is what we're all doing anyway, okay? Which basically just says that for discipline, we have to use evidence-based behavioral support. Disciplinary procedures have to be evidence-based. That's what we've all been doing for a long time. So I'm not worried about this first slide. This basically says, I guess the legislature's telling us things that we're already doing, in my opinion. The second slide is what worries me. Whoa, did I do that? I broke it.
Jimmy!
Sorry. What did I do wrong?
You got to touch it softer.
I'm leaving that alone. I'm never going to be dumb enough to jump on that one. Oh, can you going all the way? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. This next slide, I'm there. Yep, I can do it. Thank you, sir. This line right here is what I don't like. This bill also specifies the process for a request to remove a student from the classroom. So let me just make sure you know what that means. Some of you are nodding because you already know what this bill says. And by the way, you guys know I was a teacher, so I mean I'm a pro teacher all day. I just think that there's reasons that individual teachers cannot always choose who's in their room. Because if that happened and we got to pick every kid that's in our room, good luck figuring out how to put kids in rooms, okay? Let me just put it right now, because there's going to be 5 kids at least in every school, just the same 5 kids just sitting in the hall and during every class, okay? I heard you. But this is a teacher-initiated bill that allows a teacher to initiate having a kid permanently removed from his or her room. Individual teacher, individual kid. Now, right now, if I were to ask you guys, don't do this, you're already figuring out the kids that are going to get requested, and you're probably naming the teachers that are going to do it, right? What worries me about this bill is a lot of things. Let me just put one thing out there that I bet some of you already thought of. I don't care to say it. A lot of the teachers that would use this bill, in my opinion, especially the ones that would use it early, aren't always your most productive teachers. Your best teachers would never say they're going to give up on a kid, right? So here, play this out practically. If we just let everybody kick kids out, except for the best teachers who would never use it, then by the time we turn around, all your best teachers have all the hardest kids, and they're going to quit in 3 years. So, I mean, I think I keep going. There's other ways to look at this, but I'm really worried about this bill.
What if they're sped?
So that's the $8 million question, which is right now, don't name them. Kim's not here, but she don't want me to name them.
Here.
But with
I'm here.
the kids that you're thinking of right now, because you're all thinking of multiple kids, right? How many of those kids have a IEP? Almost every single one of them. And if they don't have an IEP, by the way, they got a 504. Okay? So let me just say this bluntly from the start. IEP 504 trumps this bill. I mean, period. That's just not even a debate. So if a teacher goes all the way through this process and you and Kim and anybody in the SPED department look at the IEP and say, we can't move this kid and still service this IEP, we win on the IEP. Period. I don't care what the teacher does. I don't care if they have the best report ever. Federal law trumps state law. This is state law, IEP's federal law. Done. It's just not even debatable. Okay? All right. Let's go through, though. I want to go through some strategies here, and then we'll give you guys a break. But I want to go through some strategies. I'm just going to tell you what it is, how to beat this process. Okay? That's what I'm literally going to talk to you about, is how to beat this process. So, in the legalist, nicest way ever. All right?
Oh, you're not talking about non-renewal?
That's also legal. That's also legal. It's also legal. All right, let me first point this out, and you guys have already seen it probably. This is not effective until January. So the first way I'm going to tell you to beat this bill is anybody that comes to you with this request in the fall, no. That's the simple answer. It does not apply. It is not the law. Not until January 1. The way I also read that is even if they start gathering their evidence in November, I'm not acknowledging any evidence in November. The law didn't go into effect until January. So you can't start gathering your evidence until January, in my opinion. Okay? All right, so let's keep going. There's a 6-part process that the teacher has to go through, and I'll go ahead and foreshadow this. Step 4 is the most important one. It's the one that is our biggest friend. Okay? Number 1 is the teacher has to show in a written request for us to even, by the way, this is not just for us to approve it. This is for us to even consider it a valid request. You see where I'm going? If they haven't done all 6, it's not even, you can just say, it's like an RFP at that point. You didn't hit point 6, it's out. Okay, we don't have to get to the part where it's valid or not. It's just done. All right, so number 1 is they have to take action to address the student's disruptive behavior. So let's break that down for a second. If you guys have all taught, some of you are still teaching, you're all administrators as well. Can you fix a kid's behavior in a day? So if they're taking action to address the behavior, that is not a couple days worth of documentation. That is, to me, at least a few weeks at minimum, right? Because it's not valid for you to just look at a couple days and say, oh, well, this teacher says, he wouldn't do this for Monday and Tuesday, so I moved on to step 2. No way. No way. That can't be valid, right? Number 2, provided consequences for the student's disruptive behavior, plural. See how legalistic I can be if I want to be? That's a plural word. It doesn't say consequence. So I want to see that they've used multiple consequences, multiple disciplinary tactics that have failed before they moved on. And again, that can't just be over a couple days. Following me so far? All right, 3 is a big one. They have to, before they ever bring it to you, they have to have conducted an oral conference either by documented phone conversation or in-person discussion with the student's parent or guardian regarding the student's disruptive behavior. There is no exception to that, like under truancy. So if they don't get them on the phone, they don't get them in person, they're stuck at 3. I got to say that over and over again. If they cannot have that, mom and dad won't call them back. Shocker, that might not happen. Okay, they're stuck at 3. Okay, and I also say this: there's nothing in this bill, and I think I'm not really suggesting that we're going to have a lot of teachers make things up. I don't think we will. Okay, but it's possible. So let's talk about that. There's nothing that says you can't call mom and dad to confirm that the conference happened as well. Okay, as part of this process. The other thing I'm going to point out here is in my opinion, if I'm going to look at this from a documentation standpoint, it's not enough. It wouldn't be enough for me if it just said at number 3, talk to mom and dad by phone on this date at this time. What'd you talk to them about? Because the reason you're supposed to talk to them is to discuss how to fix their behavior. So tell me what you talked to them about. It's got to be in there as well. Okay, number 4 is the most important one. The teacher, before they can go through this whole process, has to provide an opportunity for school counseling and focus on this or for a second. Kim's not here now, but she's going to like this part. Or other support services to address the student's disruptive behavior. All right, so let me just make this very clear. They cannot move past 4 unless someone else agrees with them that it's not working. It's never going to be just the teacher alone. They've got to get somebody else's input on it. So now let's play that out. What I don't think you could say to your counselors going into the school year is, don't ever approve one of these, okay? You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that, right? But you could say to your counselors something like this. You could say, this is the new law. I'm not going to tell you I would talk to my teachers about this new law, but I would tell you I talk to my counselors, and I would say, this is the new law. You may get requests for this from teachers this year. I do want you to let me know if you get a request under this law. There's nothing that says you can't have the counselors tell you, so that's fine. I do want you to let me know if you get a request for it. And I also want you to remember this. That request has got to be student-focused. The end of the day, the point of this bill is to fix student behavior. It's to look at a kid and really figure out what's going on with that kid. So you can't you as the counselor better not care that the request is coming from the person you went to the beach with last year. It's got to be you thinking about the student first. I think you can say that, absolutely, and I think that's what you should say. But let me say something else right here that's important. You guys tell me if you think I'm wrong on this. We already talked about the fact that a lot of these kids that we're thinking of have IEPs. A lot of those kids also have behavior intervention plans already, right? So do you think, and I'm not trying to be offensive to a counselor, I bet they'd agree with me, is a student counselor trained the same way a behavior specialist is trained? No. Really, if you've got a kid already that has a BIP at step 4, I think that teacher's going to have to get the behavior specialist to agree with them at step 4. I don't think a counselor is enough. That's why I would focus on or other support services that would apply to that kid. Because how could the counselor come in and override the BIP? I don't think they could. You guys see what I'm saying? So to me, if the kid already has a BIP under the 504 of the IEP, pull in the behavior. I think you make the teacher pull in the behavior specialist. You see where I'm at? Okay?
Or Alex.
Yeah. Anybody with special ed training, etc. Okay? Number 5, they've developed and implemented a plan to improve the student's behavior in a conference with the student. Okay, let me talk about that for a second. We already know the stuff they tried at 1 and 2 failed. That's why they got to keep going, right? So step 5 cannot have the same stuff in it as 1 and 2. You see what I'm saying? You can't use the same stuff. You can't tell me this failed at 1 and 2 and then say, oh, and I tried it again at 5. No, you better come up with a completely new plan at 5. Yeah, sure. It says, developed and implemented a plan to improve the student's behavior in a conference with the student. And then number 6 is the easy part. I can't give you a tip on that. It just basically says they refer them to the office. Okay, any questions on this bill?
Step 7 is going to be that teacher has to come to Greg Deal's office and explain why they don't want that kid in the office.
I will say, can I say one more thing about this one? We'll move on from it. This is rare that I would say this phrase. I don't think peer pressure is a bad thing with this bill. Let me explain it. If that teacher comes to you and says, hey, I want this kid out of my room, okay, and here's why. I don't think there's wrong for you to say, do you understand that if I move this kid out of your room, the only other teacher I can put them with is your friend Becky? And do you understand Becky's going to know that the reason they're out is because you put them out? Are you okay with that?
And Becky's got 3 she wants to give you.
Right.
That's what-
Right. I mean, I think it's fine to say that. Right. Right. I think it's fine to say that. The other thing I think we got to think through here is there's 2 things you guys are probably, we already talked about IEPs. IEP trumps. The other thing that trumps is a kid has a state constitutional right to attend school and all the way through get a diploma. So in high school, you got one physics teacher, and that kid needs the daggum science credit to graduate. That kid's staying in class. We don't have an option. We're not hiring a new physics teacher because you don't like Johnny. Okay? So, I mean, things like that, that's where this is going to be the hardest, let's just be honest, is going to be in middle school situations, where you have maybe pod situations and you could have kids or teachers say, put them in the blue pod, put them in the purple pod, or whatever. That's going to be the hardest. We're going to have to push back there.
So,
Sure,
thought of a
anything.
situation. So
Sure.
last year we had a student make a statement
Okay?
towards a teacher. We, did a threat assessment, didn't determine it. But do you think a teacher could use this situation?
But that teacher, that's a great question. But see, that teacher, in a lot of ways, I don't think would want to use this because they would have to, in their own, do so much with that kid that they already don't like. Does that make sense? So, I mean, one thing that's going to be interesting about this, and somebody else brought this up to me, so I'm not going to take credit for it, is let's say you have a teacher that we already have a behavior intervention plan for that kid, and we have a behavior specialist that said, here's how you should handle the kid, and hypothetically, this teacher doesn't follow that plan. Literally, this is going to be a way for you to be like, hey, by the way, before we do this, are you following the behavior intervention plan that we gave you 3 months ago that should be addressing all the same stuff? Because I don't even see it referenced in your write-up. Okay? I mean, this might be a little learning opportunity for some of our individuals. Put it that way. Is that okay? All right.
What if the teacher feels threatened?
That's going to be that's a way, threatened in what way? By the student?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought you meant. I just want to make sure. I mean, again, if the teacher feels threatened, I think we have to evaluate that anyway in a different way. Right? We're going to evaluate that in a totally different way than under this bill. Because under this bill, for that to apply there, the teacher would literally have to take the reins and address the kid, hold a conference with the kid. They're not going to want to. I think in those situations, the teacher's not going to want to use this bill. Does that make sense? Yeah. The kids the teacher wants to use this bill with are the kids that are jumping up and down the back of the room, that they can never get to sit down, that just drive them crazy. That's going to be what this bill is used for. Okay? In fact, this is probably a bad joke, but the correlation between ADHD and this bill is going to be pretty high, I would say. All right. I know I told you guys I would give you a break, so I apologize a lot. I'm just going to push through. Is that okay, just to get you done? Is that okay? If you're not going to offend me. If you need to go up and go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. Just go. You're not going to bother me, okay? Just go and it's fine. All right, this is talking about progressive truancy. You guys have probably already talked about this, but basically the big changes this year, one big monumental change is basically every kid's at Tier 1. Essentially the way this law reads now, every kid's at Tier 1. The other big thing I would point out is now with your attendance contracts, you have to have these 3 things at least in there, and we'll shoot this around and tell you what those are. But I bet you guys have already spent time on truancy, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that today. All right. This is crazy. So I'll point it out. I don't know if a lot of people, I know Tim saw it. Basically, the legislature for years has always announced, and the governor's office will announce, hey, we've given all teachers a raise. And there's always been pushback. What does that mean? Well, they gave us the meaning now. And by the way, the meaning is nobody in this room. Okay? I mean, is that fair to say that? I mean, we might have some people. Oh, sorry. This is the state definition. So now what the state definition is basically this. When the state announces or the state legislature says all teachers have gotten a raise, that only includes somebody that is providing instruction, direct instruction to a student at 50% or more of the time. Otherwise, they're not considering you a teacher for that raise purpose.
That means they don't have to give us money for you.
Right. That's right. Okay. This one, basically, without going through the details of it, as you guys know, we have a teacher shortage in this state, just right around the country. This is making reciprocity from teachers coming in from different states quicker. So it's basically saying if you're coming in from a different state with a different license, the state Department of Ed is supposed to give you your license faster, and they're making it a lot less hairy. And hopefully we're going to see that play out. I think we are.
Yeah, he did that.
Okay.
All his teachers need licenses.
I'll leave that one alone. All right. This one clarifies.
Bob and Betty.
This talks about dual enrollment, and basically what it says is it receives a student who is eligible to receive a dual enrollment grant is eligible to receive it for no more than 10 courses. The bill also specifies the amount of a dual enrollment grant shall be determined, how it should be determined. All right, again, I won't spend so much time on that. Okay. Told you I'm gonna the reason I want to push through is because I know I got to hit some big stuff y'all gonna want to talk about. Critical race theory. Let's talk about it. Yes, sir.
Can you go back and talk on that just a second?
Which one?
That used to be 4 and now it's 10?
10.
Am I understanding that right?
Correct. It is 10. Yep, no more than 10. Not automatically 10, no more than 10 with the grant.
We figured this one out.
Okay. There you go. I mean, practically, I don't know. I'll tell you that.
There's no more money in there. It's just,
That doesn't make any sense.
I know it, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. All right, let's go to critical race theory. The thing about this bill, and I promise you, you're not going to get any political on this. I will say this. This bill has been covered in a lot of different ways, and I don't think practically, and you guys are welcome to disagree with me on this, okay? Believe me, I think it's a complicated subject. I don't think this bill practically does as much as people think it was going to, from a practical perspective. So hear me out on that, and you tell me at the end if you agree with me, okay? So basically, the critical race theory bill, one thing that's really important about it is it's got big teeth, okay? I'm going to read this to you. If they find out, if we're reported by a parent and the commissioner's office finds out that we knowingly violated this bill, and I want to talk about how I read that, then the commissioner shall withhold state funds. They have to take money from us. It's not, the commissioner doesn't even have the option to not do it. They have to take money from us until we fix it. And it could be, it's really up to the commissioner. So it's a big deal. Now, I don't think knowingly is the teacher themselves knowing it. The way I would read that, and I guarantee the commissioner's office is going to read the same way, is if we get a complaint at administrative level and we then don't do anything about it, that's going to be when we knowingly violated the bill. Make sense? So if you get complaints, we have to treat them seriously under this bill. That doesn't mean you have to agree with the parent. I mean, I hope I'm never going to say that. But it means we at least have to document that we looked into it and why we don't think it's violative. Or if it is violative, how we fixed it. Do I think that automatically you're going to have to fire a teacher because they violated this bill knowingly or unknowingly? No. I mean, it might literally just be you documenting that you got a complaint from the parent, you went to the teacher and said, hey, why'd you do that? They tell you and say, do it this way next time. And you move on, document it, and you're good. Okay? I mean, it could be that easy. It could be more complicated, but it could be that easy. Okay? All right, let's talk about what this bill says you cannot talk about or you cannot do. There's a lot. The first things it talks about are, so you cannot promote, a teacher cannot promote that one race or sex is inherently superior. An individual, that you cannot promote that an individual by virtue of their race, sex is inherently privileged or racist. So one thing you're starting to see so far is, although this bill was called the critical race theory bill, throughout the bill it is race and gender. It is not just about race, it's race and gender throughout the bill. Okay? You also cannot say an individual should be discriminated against because of their race or sex. You can't say their moral character is determined by their race or sex. You can't say that an individual by virtue of their race or sex bears responsibility for actions committed in the past. All right, again, I'm just reading these straight from the statute because I want you to see them in the light of day. Oh, I'm sorry, we'll go one more. You can't say that an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress solely because of their race. All right, so let me stop for a second. Does it mean, under this bill, that you can't talk about any of these issues? No. You can't promote them as factual or as the only way to look at it. That's the way the bill sort of works. Okay, so use an idea of, and I know I'm walking in a crazy world right now, use an idea of white privilege. Could a teacher in a contemporary issues class talk about with the class, whether they should or not, it's up to you guys, but could they under the law talk about the concept of white privilege? Yes. They just couldn't say white privilege is factual. So for example, in contemporary issues, if a teacher wanted to talk about that, they would have to maybe have an article saying, yes, it is real, and an article saying it's not. Okay? So maybe you got one from the Wall Street Journal questioning it, and you got one from the New York Times saying it is. I mean, I'm just making something up, but you guys see what I'm saying? You just got to give equal access to both points of view. All right, it's not banning talking about it, it's banning promoting one way, right? A meritocracy is inherently racist. Can't talk about that. The state of the United States, this state of the United States is fundamentally or irredeemably racist. This is my favorite. You cannot promote or advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. I hope so. I mean, that seems like, wow. Number 10 is interesting. Number 10 is where this bill goes way wider than you think it is. You cannot promote division between or resentment of a race, a sex, and then it goes way wider. Religion, creed, nonviolent political affiliation, social class, or class. So you couldn't even have a teacher, and I don't think this is going to happen anyway, a teacher couldn't come in and say, all Republicans are stupid, or all Democrats are stupid. Under this bill, that is banned specifically. Okay? Ascribing character traits, moral or ethical values to a race or sex. Those are the things that are banned. Okay, we'll move, now before any questions, let's move on to the next part, because I think that what it doesn't prohibit is actually where this bill practically becomes not as restrictive as we thought. Okay? So this amendment, this bill does not prohibit an LEA or a public charter school. Okay, quick sidebar. One thing that was interesting when charter schools first got started was the concept of charter schools, and you guys know this was public schools without the red tape, right? What's kind of funny is that every bill now that the legislature passes applies to charter schools too. So like all the stuff that we deal with is now, they're applying it to them. So they're getting the same amount of red tape we are. I mean, I really don't know anymore what the difference is going to be if the legislature keeps going the way they're going, and they're the ones that sort of like them. I mean, anyway, just interesting. So number one, you absolutely can do this. So it doesn't prohibit the history of an ethnic group as described in textbooks and instructional materials adopted in accordance with the law. So any of our approved curriculum materials are fair game. Let me say that again. Any of your approved textbooks, any of your approved instructional materials are fair game to talk about. They did not change. This did not change any of that. So that's the biggest thing I take from this is 99.9% of the stuff our teachers are teaching is coming from approved curriculum, so they get to still teach it. This didn't change that at all. You see what I'm saying? Yes, sir.
Even if it opposes the one that you said that was very general that had teeth, because I could see those being diapers.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So the answer is yes. So if it's already in a state approved or approved textbook, and we've gone through the proper process, then we still get to teach from that textbook.
Because this has been around since they taught this in law school.
Oh yeah,
In the 80s.
a long time.
I mean, so
80s. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, so why this shift?
Oh man, that's the $10 million question. I don't have a good answer. I really.
This isn't something
Well, that's true. Okay, I think Tim's right. The 1619 project obviously got a lot of publicity. I think that's part of it. I do think that's a big part of it. Is because you had a lot of people that didn't want the 1619 project curriculum taught, and this is sort of the direct. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's true. This is what I was talking about a second ago. You can still have the impartial discussion of controversial aspects of history. And here's something interesting a lot of people forget about. So in the Teacher Code of Ethics, which we've had for a long time, there is literally a provision in the Teacher Code of Ethics that's been in there as long as I know that says we as educators have a obligation to, I'm paraphrasing, but this is basically what it says, have an obligation to ensure that students are given equal access to varying points of view. And that is the provision that I've always used to say teachers are not really allowed to teach kids what to think in social studies, but they're telling them how to think. And this bill really goes back to that too. Okay, whether you disagree with the bill or not, that part is still in there. Yep.
So wearing your shirt to work has a specific party affiliation.
Yeah, you shouldn't be doing that anyway, because we do have a.
That covers.
Oh well, we have a policy. We still have a school board policy, a standard TSBA policy that says you shouldn't be wearing politically affiliated materials, garments, buttons, hats to work in the middle of class. Let's talk through that for a second. So you said talking about it in the teacher's lounge. I don't think we could necessarily ban teachers at lunch from having political discussions. You can say you're not allowed to be disrespectful to others, you're not allowed to be crude, you're not allowed to attack others, even if it's politically related, you can do that, right? But you couldn't ban it. You can say to teachers unequivocally, you cannot promote a specific political party or candidate in class. Unequivocally, we can do that. Because the job of the teacher by law always has been, when you're stepping in on behalf of the school system, you don't get to advocate your personal political beliefs to the kids, right? I thought there was another one. Oh yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So, I'm almost ready to ask you, so, we're in the Bible Belt,
Sure.
so.
I think you can say that but safely.
Yeah, so
I'm just
what
playing.
about those that want to wear t-shirts that have to do with their religion, their church, their religion, and things like that? Is that promoting, it's not political, with, yeah, any of that?
That's a judgment call. So I can tell you that there are systems that don't allow for that, but it's a judgment call. It's not something that we have to ban. I'll put it that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's required that you ban that. Now, I think we would be required to ban a teacher that was preaching during class, right? Or saying, hey, Jimmy, I want you to come to my church this weekend for an evangel. You know, can't do that. But in terms of what I would call passive forms of religious expression, I think that's still available. Make sense?
What if I had a parent call and complain that a teacher was wearing scripture on a shirt?
Yeah, we'd have to look at it. We'd have to look at it then. So if we had a parent complain about it, and then we had evidence that if we looked at it that the kid felt, you know, put upon or felt discriminated against, we might have to look at it there. But it would be case by case. Yep. Okay. Now, let me go to number 3, because number 3 is important too. If there's one piece of misinformation about this bill that I think has to be addressed, it's number 3. Okay? Again, I'm not promoting or going against this bill. I just like to talk about the facts, okay? So number 3, it says specifically we can talk about the impartial instruction of historical oppression of a particular group of people based on race, ethnicity, etc. So the bill literally says there are examples of historical oppression based on race, ethnicity, class, etc. So when you've heard people say, this bill says you can't teach that slavery was bad, that's not true. You can absolutely say, under this bill, and I think are encouraged to, slavery was bad. You could teach under this bill that slavery was a big part of the Civil War. You could teach under this bill that Jim Crow laws are terrible. Those things are absolutely still allowed under this law. It's the modern stuff, it's sort of the present moving forward that gets complicated. The historical stuff, in my opinion, is still the same way we've always taught it. Okay? And then the last thing is any historical documents are still there. So example, case law, like if you want to talk about Dred Scott and you want to say Dred Scott, the Supreme Court treated Dred Scott poorly, not only do we think that, the Supreme Court later agreed that the previous Supreme Court treated Dred Scott poorly. That's still there. That's still taught. So let me bottom line this. If you said to me, do I think this will have a big effect on social studies teachers? I really don't. So history, government, I just don't think, because it's going to be the same way we've always taught it. The textbooks are there. They're using the same instructional materials. The 2 things I'm most worried about, this bill being a problem for teachers, contemporary issues, is by far my number 1 worry. And then number 2 is actually ELA. And hear me out on ELA first, because I think you guys already know why I'm worried about contemporary issues, because sometimes they're just pulling materials, right? ELA, what I'm worried about is, it's that, in a lot of ways, the teacher I'm most worried about messing up on this is negligently. It's the teacher that is a really great English teacher, and they see a kid that loves a certain book. Okay, I'm just going to use an author, and I've read this author. I think she's great in a lot of ways. So Toni Morrison. So you have a kid that really shows an interest in Toni Morrison, and that teacher says, hey, you should read X, Y, and Z, which is by Toni Morrison, and some of her later stuff certainly goes farther politically. Now it looks like to that parent, we're promoting the stuff that Toni Morrison is promoting in a book that's not even part of our curriculum. It's just a teacher giving a reading recommendation. So I think those teachers are going to have to be more careful, those English teachers, about these sort of off-the-cuff reading recommendations, because that parent and the newspaper are going to treat that like we're teaching that book.
Kind of a slippery slope.
Oh, I know.
I mean,
It's very slippery.
I mean, a kid likes a book.
I know. That's what I'm most worried about. That's why it bothers me to say it, because literally it's like getting upset with the teacher if we're trying to do a great job. I mean, that bothers me. I'm with you.
Let's flesh that out a little.
Sure, go ahead.
When you talk about,
And by the way, I shouldn't just use Toni Morrison. I'll use any author that goes one side or the other. Sure, anybody.
So you get the author. Can you at least, like with the child, could you present like the writings that they gave, the books that they wrote, or is that, I mean, how is that?
I know, that's what's tough. I think what I would do, if I was that teacher now, the only way I can answer that question is like me thinking through legal liability, what would I do? I think, maybe this goes too far, and this is being a lame lawyer, but what I think I'd do is I would send an email home to the parents that say, hey, these are not books that we teach and not part of our curriculum, but I noticed your child has an interest in X, and here are some other authors they might like. But as long as you start off by saying, this is just a me recommendation, I think you'd still be fine. Does that make sense? And the only reason I would want to do that by an email now is because, I don't know if y'all know this, but parents don't always get the same message we do when it comes verbally, right? Okay, and then the other thing, contemporary issues. Let's talk about that for just 1 second, then I'll move on from this bill. If I was a contemporary issues teacher now, every time I pulled an article on something that I want the kids to read, I would literally find an article that gives the opposite viewpoint. I would literally have them, now you have to do them the same day, but I would have them ready and in the chamber. And I would almost, like if it was me now, I would almost say, okay, here are the publications that I'm going to pull stuff from this year. Here are my right-wing ones, here are my left-wing ones. And I'm just going to pull them from both all year. That's what I would do if it was me. It is. Because here's why. I'm going to answer why.
You have to teach every subject twice.
In a way.
These folks see it the way those folks see it.
Because here's why. If we get the email from the parent there, right, and the parent says, why did you assign this article by Ta-Nehisi Coates yesterday for my kid to read? I want to be able to respond and say, I'm not teaching that perspective. Tomorrow, we're reading this, which is another author from the Federalist on the same subject. And I think it immediately kills the whole complaint. I know y'all are sitting there thinking, this is tough, and I agree with you, but I'm just saying that's what I would do. All right. All right, I'm going to keep going, and I promise some of these others won't be as bad. Special education. Oh, real quick, is there any other follow-ups on CRT? Any other follow-ups on critical race theory? Okay. Special Education Behavioral Supports Act. Okay. This act basically doesn't change too much, in my opinion. It just sort of tweaks some things and reminds us. But let me do it real quick. So, real quick refresher. If we're going to do an emergency restraint or isolation of a kid, what has to happen? Like, what made us do it? Harm themselves or others. There you go. Right? So that hadn't changed. But one thing that's very clear under this bill, and I know you know this, one thing that's very clear in this bill, if we do a restraint now that is an emergency restraint or isolation, we have to have an IEP within 10 days. If we do an extended restraint, even if it's in the IEP that we can restrain the kid, we have to do an IEP within 10 days. Okay? Now, by the way, good luck scheduling it with the parents. I get that part. I'm leaving that part alone. The other thing this bill says is, I think, if I'm breaking it down, we can still have IEPs that say you can have non-emergency restraint of certain kids. Like, for example, with our younger kids, sometimes we might have like a holding restraint because it calms them, right? That's rare, but we have those. So if we have that now, I think the law is going to say there's no way you could have that in an IEP now without an FBA2. There's no way you could have that without a behavior specialist signing off on it. Let me break that down one more time. If you are going to have non-emergency restraint in the IEP, then I think an FBA is a must now. I just don't think they could go to, you'd have to have both under this law. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, and I'm going to go through that one quickly. All right, this is the Common Core bill. I bet this doesn't, so basically this just says if we have anything that is only Common Core based, then that's not good. So, I mean, I just don't think that anybody really anymore has something that's purely Common Core. All right. All right, there you go. This is another brushback pitch bill. This is everybody was worried because every school system in the state lost kids last year during the pandemic. And this is the BEP hold harmless, so we're not going to be held accountable for that. We'll still get the money unless you happen to be an LEA that doesn't comply with truancy laws or attendance things that the state. So hypothetically, if you were Metro or Shelby and disagreed with the state, you could lose millions of dollars. Okay? Again, that is 100% what that's about. Okay. You said you want me to talk about this one, right? The open enrollment period? Yeah. So this applies next year. Next year, not this year. Let's talk about it a little bit. So this requires each LEA to have an open enrollment period of at least 30 days, during which the parents or guardian may choose from a list of LEA schools with available space and request to transfer. Any parent, any child. So play that out. During that open enrollment period, starting next year, if we have space in your school, we don't have to provide transport. You only have to transport for the closest school. But literally any parent could say, okay, I'm not going to Anderson County, I'm going to Clinton now. And because you guys posted that you have, and it would be first come, first serve. That one was popular, you can tell by the silence. Okay, does it make sense?
Do you have to take that student at that point in time?
If you have space.
Unless you have 40 seats available and there's 42 people that apply.
There you go.
Do a lottery.
Yeah, so yeah, you would do it in a non-discriminatory way. Basically, first come, first serve. You could do a lottery. There's different.
We're going to work hard to get this law changed before it goes into effect.
The other thing I would say about this law, and you haven't heard me say this yet, but there is no requirement as to when the 30-day period is. So you hypothetically could do the 30-day period in April for the next school year. And if parents happen to miss it, they happen to miss it. So anyway, that's going to be how it works. There's a good chance, I agree with Tim, that the law gets changed before next year. It does not apply this year.
This is not similar to a transfer.
In what way?
Well, like, we have a kid that Clinton and wants to go to Norris, so you wouldn't treat it like a transfer kid.
No, it's an open enrollment period transfer.
There's no, here's the biggest problem with this bill is
come
we
to you.
do grade, attendance, and discipline. There is none of that.
No,
If you wanna go, you get to go,
Yes.
it's an open
as
enrollment.
long as you have space.
As long as you have space and you pick, and if
Yeah.
I go before you and I'm an F student and you're an A student and there's only one spot, I get it before that one does, cause I got mine in on the 20th.
That's right.
Put theirs in on the 25th.
So is that,
I'm coming. Okay, go here first. I'm coming there. Oh, yes. It's just, so it's not, that's a great question. This is not you get to go to different counties. That is just kids within your school system. Kids within your school system. I'm sorry, I should have said that. Each LEA, yes.
Is space defined by the
Great question. No. So that is the one advantage of the bill. I'm glad you asked that. We get to define what space is, and it's not even space at the time of enrollment period. It is space that you anticipate you might have based on prior numbers. So we do get a lot of control as to what open space is. No question about that. That's probably the biggest advantage we get.
This come out of where? Out of Rutledge, out of Rutherford.
That's right.
I think.
Yeah, Middle Tennessee.
There was a couple of high schools down there, parents wanted to go to a different school and they didn't get to go.
Shocker. Okay, we'll keep going. I'm going to go, and I'm trying to get going quick. This is the apprenticeship program. Real quickly, this just applies to high schools. All this says is every high school now, we have to tell the state, every high school in the state of Tennessee has to tell the state who your designated apprenticeship program contact is. The reason for that is the state is really pushing, the governor really believes in this apprenticeship concept. They're really pushing that the state is going to now publish, this department is going to publish a list for every high school in the state of Tennessee of who you contact if you're a local business and you want to do an apprenticeship. So every school has to have somebody that this is. Okay, keep going. Okay, this is the endorsement exemption. So we all know we're still having issues, filling certain spots. So for this next year at least this next year, we can request endorsement exemptions for everything but SPED. For everything but SPED. Okay? And I believe you can teach now, even outside of your core area, two courses now instead of one. Isn't that right? I believe that's right as well.
Really? You can do that year or semester?
I think it's this year.
Now?
It's fifth school year. This school year.
So just this, you can teach outside your. This is fantastic. I mean, this is
Sorry.
the best thing you've said.
Sorry. Sorry.
If you're at a school that actually has a number.
I apologize. I'll send you a gift certificate. I apologize. I know what I walked into there. Sorry. All right, real quick. Another thing that's interesting that the state has figured out is that they figured out every school has a website. And now, literally every year now, we're getting 2 or 3 new bills that say, you got to put this on your website. You got to put this on your website. You got to put this on your website. So this year, we have to put textbook information on our websites. No big deal. We're going to start doing that. I'm sure you guys are doing it. But there's another one I want to show you in a second that's another website bill that comes into effect next year. You guys have employed bus drivers, right? Not contract? So I'm just going to skip this one. You have contract. So you can go to a 6-year contract now on our bus contracts. And the reason for that is obviously because we're having a shortage, right? Everybody is. This just talks about bidding. I'm not going to bother you guys with that, but it's a good thing. Okay. This is an interesting one I mentioned a second ago. Starting next year, July 1 next year, we're going to have to publish on our websites the curriculum for every class. So hypothetically, if you have teachers that are not the best at paperwork, you better tell them next year their syllabus, their curriculum is going to have to go up on the website starting the semester. Yep.
We had that 2 years ago where you have to do the syllabus.
So it's the same thing, but it's is more. Oh, that's for, what was it for? I forget. Yeah, you're right. Summers. Yeah. So, but this is, so I'm trying to even remember. Okay.
I think this one actually has the materials you've got to use.
It does. You have to actually utilize your materials as well. So it's course description and a list of materials. All right. I'm going fast, I know, but I'm going to there's 2 big ones left that I got to hit on. This is about alternative school, and it's basically if the alternative school is housed, but it's not a big, don't worry about it. We can talk about it, but it's not a big change. There's something funny about this, and I'm just going to make fun of the legislature for a second. So 2 years ago, they started, as you know, really jumping into and saying, hey, here's how alternative schools should work, and we talked about it. They did not know until this year that there are a lot of alternative schools in the state of Tennessee in which the alternative school is either in the same school building or on the same school campus as a lot of high schools or middle schools. They literally have changed fundamentally how alternative schools work, and then 2 years later it was like, oh yeah, by the way, if it's on the same campus, so I just love that they don't always have all the information. All right. Okay. We'll talk about this one. I told you guys there was a lot. I'm trying to go fast. This is what I'm going to call the LGBTQ plus bill. This bill you would think logically or logistically works the same as the CRT bill. It doesn't. It doesn't. Okay, so from a practical level, it's different. There is nothing in this law that says we cannot have course materials or materials that have sexual orientation aspects or gender identity aspects. You can have those. You just have to provide 30 days notice to the parent if you do. So whereas the CRT stuff sort of bans certain things, this doesn't ban anything. It just says we have to provide notice to the parents of at least 30 days beforehand before it's taught, and then the parent has the right to have their child opt out and get an alternative assignment. And I do read this broadly. So if you even have an ELA with a short story that's been approved, so again, the same things don't apply. So it could be in an approved textbook, we still have to notify them about it. It could be an approved novel, we still have to notify them about it, at least 30 days before that novel is taught. It could be a gay character, it could be a kid that is struggling with their sexuality. I think the parents have to get notification of that now at least 30 days before it's taught. Okay, let me play this out. A lot of systems are doing this differently. I know of at least one system that this is what they're going to do. They're having their teachers at the beginning of the whole year figure out what would fall under this. And they're sending one letter out for the whole year. One letter out for the whole year. Because they're going to fight the battle one time. Okay? And it's just got a literally, I know I can show you what it looks like if you guys want to see it. It explains the bill, explains you have the right to opt out, and in a table at the bottom, on the left side it names the book or the story that it's talked about in, and on the right side it says homosexual character or character struggling with sexuality, something like that. Transgender character. That's all it says, brief description. And it gives the parent the ability to opt out. Let me say this, you cannot penalize the kid. They have to get a completely different alternate activity, alternate assignment, alternate book. So make sure your teachers know that for any of those materials that they're assigning that have those aspects in it, they have to have alternatives available. I know. Yep.
What about, so a lot of us have purchased social emotional learning material.
Yep.
Well, where you do scenarios and things like that, that might say,
oh yeah.
like for tolerance, it might be like,
right.
Here's 5 kids, blah, blah, blah.
Are you doing that as part of, and when you're saying you purchase those materials, is that part of like a character curriculum that you're doing through guidance?
Yes, but
So,
it might be like the guidance people are meeting with kids
individually.
Or,
so what I would do is let's play that 2 different ways. So if you have that sort of character materials, and it's part of a guidance curriculum, like a middle school guidance curriculum, then I think it would be the same thing we always do. We're going to send that out, as the guidance counselor is going to send that out as part of their teaching materials, right? So at least 30 days. If it's individual, just to protect myself, what I would do is I would just send the parent an email as the guidance counselor saying, hey, you should know, as part of the things that I'm using to counsel your child, we do have these materials and they could have this in it. Do you have anything against me using that? And if they do, just don't use it.
But that still has to be 30 days in advance.
Yeah, I'll admit though, as long as you're still providing them notice on those one-to-ones, I'm not going to be as worried. You might miss the notice. Sure. Yep.
If you waited 30 days, you'd miss the month.
That's what I'm saying. So for those, this is really talking about instructional materials. I look at it differently. I'm just saying to protect myself, I would provide them some notice. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to move on. Any other on this one? Okay, I know you guys are getting tired, and I'm trying. There's one more big one I want to hit on. Oh, real quick, coaches. Because you guys didn't have enough to worry about. So starting next year, the state is pretty big going to expand what all of our coaches have to learn. And that is volunteer coaches and paid coaches. Volunteer and paid. So for example, some of this stuff that you guys are already doing, but one is they got to receive training in CPR. So arguably all of our coaches as of next year are going to be CPR certified. Now that's not an annual requirement because CPR I think is a 2-year certification, right? But this is going to be a big expansion to coaching requirements. Starts next year. Okay. Tennessee accommodations for children. This is the bathroom bill. We've already talked about it. It basically just says, even if it's a non-gender related issue, you could have a kid that, I'm not making fun of this, I'm just saying you could have a kid with irritable bowel syndrome. And if that parent or kid comes to you and wants to use a private bathroom facility, we have to take that seriously and usually grant them that access. So we'll say this, you guys were joking about this earlier, but from a school construction standpoint, we're probably going to have more private bathrooms moving forward too, because this bill even applies to non-gender issues. It just applies to any kid that doesn't feel comfortable in a public bathroom. Oops, I did it again. Sorry. What did I do? Oh, I think I hit that. I did. My fault. You about right. I only did it twice. You guys are like, that's more than anybody else has done it.
Yesterday was a field day.
Yeah, where was? Yeah, that'll work. I'm almost done, guys. I got one more I want to hit, and I'm done. I promise. No worries. I'll tell you what I want to hit. I'll just say it out loud, and then we'll get there. Just go to the last one, if you don't mind. But I'll keep talking. Third grade retention. So all my high school, middle school people, you can stop listening for 1 second. Third grade retention, I want to talk to you for a second about it. When does that start? Next year. So it is, I got to say that first. I think everybody knows it, but I want to say it. It is for basically the first group that will apply to are your second graders this year. Okay, second graders this year. So what does basically the law say? By the way, hopefully it changes some before next year, but let's just assume it doesn't. Hopefully what it will say is, let's go through the categories that don't have to be retained, that don't have to be. One is ELL. And by the way, this is even if a kid scores on ELA approaching or below. If they're a third grader next year and they are ELL for 2 years or less. You see what I'm saying with that? So basically what that says is if a kid has received ELA instruction, even if they're ELL, I'm using too many acronyms, right? Even if they're ELL, if they've received ELA instruction for over 2 years, that kid could still be retained. But if they're ELL only for less than 2 years or 2 years or less, they cannot be retained. Let me just put it in a practical way. If you have a kid next year that's in third grade that was second grade, third grade ELL, and they went below on ELA, they go to fourth. If you had a kid, though, that started with you in kindergarten ELL, and that kid got below on ELA score in third grade, they're getting retained. Okay? All right, number 2. This is the big one. I want to spend 2 seconds on this. It also says if the kid was previously retained, they cannot be retained again. That is important for 2 reasons. Let's outline that. One is if the kid was retained in first grade, I don't care what their score is, they're going to fourth. Okay? That's also important for this reason. Remember this. That means this bill only affects a kid one time. Hear me out? So if they failed next year, a lot of people thought that a kid could literally get caught in like a whirlwind and just flood, right? They just get stuck in third grade forever. You can only be retained under this bill one time. One time. I don't care what your score is the next year, you're going up. Make sense? My favorite part, and I promise I'm almost done, I'm going to hit it right at 12. My favorite part is number 3, and I'm sorry I'm laughing, but y'all see why. You get to take a TCAP retest. What is that? Does anybody know what that is? So here's my favorite part of that is, literally that assumes this. I'll say this send this to the state if you want. That assumes that we're getting our scores back in time on the normal TCAP, and then we would get a TCAP retest score back in time to figure out what to do with that kid the next year. We don't believe you. I'm going to move on to number 4. Okay. But there is something important about that too, which is this. I think Tim's going to back me up. We haven't talked about it, but I'll bet you money I'm good. This assumes that the state's going to get your scores back in time. We're not going to battle with mom and dad over an assumption. We're going to have the scores. I mean, I guarantee you, TOS, TSBA, we're all going to go to war on that. I'm not going to battle with 25 moms and dads over what we think might happen with the scores. It's going to be a score, it's not a score. Okay, so that you guys are right when you're sitting there thinking, if we don't have our scores. Yeah, we're not going to do it if we don't have our scores. All right, another 4, I'm almost there. Learning loss bridge camp. This is in a bill that doesn't even take effect really until 2 years from now. And they're assuming we're still having learning loss bridge camps. So if you thought that was temporary, that is not. The state's making it clear through little breadcrumbs that they're expecting us to have those permanently. Okay? And then the assigned tutor program. Number 5 is important because we don't know what that program looks like yet, but it is really the only option you would have if you wanted to promote a kid without having to make them go through the bridge camp or retest or anything like that. Literally, you could just say, I'm putting this kid in 4th grade because I'm going to have him go through tutoring next year. And then they go up. But that only applies, and I'm almost there. Number 5 does not apply if the kid scored below. So if a kid scored below an ELA, they cannot be promoted with that tutoring program. It's only for kids that are approaching. I know that's confusing. That's why I wanted to hit on it. It is a terrible bill. I'll say that too. It's been a pleasure to see you guys. I know I talked way too long this year. Blame the legislature. Yes, sir.
Just a question from an earlier slide.
Sure.
The CPR training for all coaches.
Yep.
When does that go into effect?
Next year.
So
Next summer.
Next year, so like the football programs and stuff. So when we say next year, July 1st,
22, 23. So they haven't come out. We hope we're going to get more information as to when you would actually have to complete them all. Right now, they haven't told us that. Okay. But the bill itself, in terms of we start counting the more courses, doesn't start until next school year. Okay. So really, at least July 1 of next year. Guys, a pleasure. Thank you all. Have a great school year. Appreciate you, my friend. That's a lot of stuff.